Yes, I am. I have a key. I have also a computer. I go to it. I just do the screen and you.
Dear colleagues, welcome back. I need sincerely to apologize for distracting you from the sunshine and bringing you here again. And also I'm very thankful for all of those who have the energy and courage to stay with us also this afternoon, where we are moving more and more close to the macro-regional strategies concrete works. But before we come to that, I've just checked the VIP room. I didn't see a lot of work going on already. Just to remind you, I'm pushing, lady, sorry, that there is work to be done. But one group did apparently activate themselves because we promised to have also the screen and the voice available in the restaurant. So please, you are really encouraged to come with the products by the evening. Saying this, let's go back to our agenda. I've seen before that you were been listening very carefully to Dana. She was very much to the point with some very important messages to us. So I am most happy to invite her once again to speak to us, this time more concretely on communications and macro-regional strategies. Dana, please.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues, and I apologize. I am the reason why you had to cut your break. But the good news is that you will finish earlier. The bad news is that I will still start on a very crisp analysis of the problem before understanding the solutions that we need to apply and telling what exactly my part of the Commission, Directorate General for Regional Affairs, will do to communicate in a way which we think is effective. So first of all, dear colleagues, talk to your friends, talk to your parents, talk to anyone in the metro, and you will see that people associate with the EU with complicated rules that nobody understands, and God knows what they are there for. But they don't associate the EU with the concrete products which those rules bring to them. I'll give you an example. People think that the EU is the one putting very complex rules on how water should be transported in the EU. But they don't think about the EU when they drink water from the robinet, from the tap. They think and they see very complex technical rules about telecom markets, liberalization, but they don't think about the EU when they pay their phone bill. Remember the mobile phone bills 15 years ago? Compare them with those of today. But nobody thinks of the EU when they pay their reduced mobile phone bill. People think that the EU does those useless, complex rules on energy efficiency in buildings. How complicated does that sound? They don't think about the EU when they pay their energy bill in January when it's -20, and 10 years ago it would have been much more. The problem is that we have done a bad deal at communicating by focusing on the procedures, on the thick rules in thick books, and not on the good which it brings. We can blame it on the people. It's their fault. They just don't get it. As one of the leaders of the Tory party in the UK used to say after they lost several elections in a row, what's wrong with the people? They don't vote for us. Well, it's not the people. We can blame it on journalists. I'm a former journalist and editor myself. So are they lazy, and do they prefer the easy, eye-catching stories to the perceived boring ones? And do they think it's as we heard a bit this morning, that it's the responsibility of the public media to report on the boring stories because the private one needs to go for those catching ones which make money for them? Well, I think that the journalists should take a longer-term perspective to avoid Brexit and to avoid accidents which probably do not fit into their longer-term editorial line, but we need to help them. And the fault lays with us for all those perceptions of complicated rules and no results. We have a gold mine of projects on macro-regional strategies, on cohesion policy, and it's just about showing people what that is for them, what it brings for them. So, we need to do impactful communication. This morning I said that we need to do continuous communication, meaning not just sparingly when we have an event. We have a great event now, we write a press release, another one next year, and we have our planning of press releases and press conferences, and that's it. So continuous communication at different levels of intensity, but also impactful communication, which gets people's attention and which they retain. So what is an impactful communication? And the same applies to macro-regional strategies, to cohesion policy, and I dare say for any product in the business world. When you want to market a product and you want it to catch people's attentions, you first need to know what are the objectives of your communication. What do you want to achieve? Do you want people awareness, to raise their awareness about what we do? Or do you want people engagement, meaning do you want them to do something about it? I don't know if it's environmental communication. Do you want them to go out and clean the rivers? Do you want to prompt them into action? Do you want them to multiply what you say? Do you want them to talk about it, to go to the schools to talk, or just simply to talk to their friends? So it can be awareness raising, it can be engagement if it's about the public. But do you always want to communicate to the public? Sometimes you want to communicate to the stakeholders. So do you want to communicate to decision makers? Do you want to communicate to us, the Commission in Brussels, to the EU institutions in Brussels? Because, I don't know, you want a new stage in the life of the strategy, you want a different strategy. Do you want to address specific stakeholders in the business community because you want partnerships with them? Or do you want to communicate to environmental groups? Well, defining the objectives and the target groups for your communication is the first thing. Unless you get this right and you clarify exactly what you want to achieve with the communication and to whom you want to communicate, we are never going to be convincing. So, objectives and targets. Thirdly, extremely important, what messages do you give to your audience to achieve your objective? It's going to be a different one if it's the public, if it's the decision makers in Brussels, if it's the business groups, if it's the environmental groups, or if it's the groups of mothers from the next village because you want to convince them of something in relation to the school. The way in which you create the message for your communication will be different depending on your audience. General speaking terms which are abstract and do not upset anyone, but do not get anyone's attention either, are never going to be effective. So that's about the message. Fourthly, which tools do you use? It's depending on your audience, on the message. Again, do you use social media? If so, which one? Do you use LinkedIn because you are addressing a community of professionals where you know that they feel more directly targeted and they feel like a closed circle, where we know they vetted the people, so the level of trust is different, but also the message will be different. Do you use Twitter? Twitter works in many countries, but not in all. In Germany, Twitter is not that big. In America, it's huge. Do you use Facebook? Or do you use blogs? Do you use traditional media? If so, is it TV? Is it weekly? Is it a specialized weekly? Depending on whom you are targeted. Do not waste money on communication campaigns or on delivering messages distributed through tools which are not adapted to your audience. Very important to establish which tool is likely to get to your audience and give a climate of trust so that they accept your message and they do something about it. So that was about the tools. But then comes something very important. which is the messengers. So, who should communicate on macro-regional strategies and on cohesion policy? Obviously, a very good ambassador is the minister who was here this morning. She is high level, she has the authority, she's known by everybody in the country. So she's a very good ambassador for this policy. I try to do my best. Commission tries to do their best to be the messengers for this policy as well, although we're less known by your constituencies, if it's the general public, than your minister is. But we are all part of the story. We are the insiders in the story. The important thing, in order to enhance the credibility of your messages, is to have third-party endorsement, to have people from outside the story who endorse it, who talk about it, who deliver the message for you. This is what we call the trusted ambassadors. Which means what? Which means that if a business person from the next village or from Portoros says that indeed the way he works together with the Croatians and we Italians under this project funded by the EU really enhanced incredibly the way he can deliver his products. Or if you have a local journalist who's known and trusted, who endorses your product, your message, or if you have another type of local celebrity, chef who cooks on Prime TV on a Sunday, if he says that he uses the best products that one can get in Slovenia, because how lucky are we to have this diversity of products, because we have a policy in the EU which means that small producers can be protected and can continue producing their agricultural products. This is third-party endorsement, which is much more powerful than anything that we do, even if we do it very well and according to the state of the art. Go for emotions. Go for the people's stories. Storytelling, as we said this morning. Yes, we can say in a press release that the European Commission or that the government adopted today through a delegated act the start of a project of 2 million euros which following the feasibility study will in the end perhaps lead to the start of a construction of something. You lost it. If you show a small video clip where you see a young father playing football with his young children, happy to spend quality time together because his commuting time was reduced by 2 hours a day because there is this new bridge here between, on a river between Croatia and Slovenia. And this was done because there was working together on both sides of the border to have joint infrastructure projects. That's the story. It's the emotion of the young father. Everybody can see himself or herself in that story. And this is something which resonates with people's concerns, not our press release with the delegated act and the figure attached to it. So create emotional connection by talking about things that people feel concerned about. I'll give you an example. You can say that cohesion policy or any strategy created 10,000 jobs in Austria. Is it much? Is it little? Who can tell? It's just a figure. And who am I to know and who am I to care? It's not my job anyway. But if you show instead a poster or a short video clip or a little reportage in the newspaper showing how the baker in the next village got a job through it because he didn't have any economic activity, he didn't have any job, he got this micro project funded and he could open a bakery. And you see the person like you from the next village who made something. It could be you. It could be something that you always wanted to do, something that you could never do, or something that you wish to do afterwards. But it could be you. And it's a face, it's a story, it's a person. So forget about the abstract general terms with which we address everybody. You target communication and you use the stories of the people who are there. And of course, at the end, we need to evaluate the impact, to assess the impact of our communications. not at the end. Well, you do a little study at the beginning, you do a little focus group to see how your messages resonate with the people. Perhaps the slogan that we find extremely clever, people will find pejorative, or people will find too abstract or too complicated. So a little checking, even if it's small scale, with your colleagues, with your friends, do a little focus group to discuss your core messages. And at the end, evaluate proportionally to your budget and the way we can. We know that evaluations are very expensive, to see if you achieved your objectives and how many people you reached and what they did afterwards. So what do we do ourselves in DG Regio in order to apply these things which I'm telling you? I'm going to focus on 4 examples, which are our most recent projects, which we have just launched, and we work heavily on them over the next months and years. First of all, we have already launched a campaign targeting the youth. It's very right that we should talk to the youth in the terms that the youth understand and like. So that's why we don't do it ourselves. We work with a company which is mounting a series of road trips involving young Europeans, 18-21. That will go across the EU. We predefined some routes. And they will go from place to place in teams of 2, and they will report about what they see, cohesion policy projects. And they will report through their selfies videos, and they will talk about that with the young people that they encounter on the roads, and they will share all of that on a platform so that people from elsewhere in the EU can relate, can comment, can liaise. This is about the youth. Then we launch a general public campaign, which seeks to do precisely what I said, use the power of audiovisual material to present stories. So the initial planning, which we're now testing, is to produce microfilms of 1 minute, so micro documentaries of 1 minute each, presenting a story. So what did cohesion policy achieve in Slovenia? We'll take that baker that I was talking about, or we'll take that father playing football, but we'll take projects which really resonate with the people. So we'll take something that people can feel, that they can identify with. So this is a general public campaign which will run initially in 7 countries this year, and next year we'll extend it to another 7 or 8, and we intend to have a permanent feature of general public campaigning along the same lines over the next years. Because communication is not a one-off. It's not that we did a campaign and we are done. You need to maintain it. Then we are going to have a partnership with the media. I think I spoke about this and Matteo did as well this morning. We are launching a call for proposals to invite media to apply for grants. We pay them to produce journalistic content which is independent editorially, so it's theirs, we don't control what they say, and so it should be, in which they report about cohesion policy, and we'll select those likely to have the best impact and to reach out to a large number of people. They will probably they will produce their journalistic content until the end of next year or so. If it's a success, we intend to continue it. And probably it's going to be a success because many journalists in the EU are asking about it. And the 4th line of action is very important because it relates to another big principle in communication, which we only touched a bit this morning, which is making communication a two-way process. We are not here to tell the people what they should think. We are not here simply to spread. They're not passive receivers of our products, of our informations, of our press releases, of our statements. They should be invited to engage. First, we need to listen to them. So we need to meet them directly. They need to speak about how they see what we achieved and what they think should be the priorities for the future. So for that, we will launch a series of local debates which will bring together the local mayors together with the people doing business in the village or in the city, together with the NGOs, and together with that most important person, the normal people. And where we leave it, It's going to be a free discussion about what has been achieved in the region and where do they see the challenges where we should focus on. These debates will start rolling out in the next month or so, and they will continue until mid-next year. And again, we'll assess, and if they work, we intend to continue them. Because these are four very important axes of communication to the young people, to the general public, through the media. It's not to the media, it's through the media, and then directly engaging people and inviting them to take part in the debates. The last thing that I want to tell you is that, well, there are principles about what is good communication, and I think myself that these are part of what the principles for a good communication. But also, we need to be aware that in communication, there is a side of cultural context which one doesn't need to neglect, which one shouldn't neglect. And there is no one-size-fits-all. So it's very important when you communicate a macro-regional strategy to have a consistent message about what's its purpose and what's its added value, but to decline it and to embed it in the local or national context. Perhaps even the national context is too large a scale. For countries like Germany, you would communicate differently to the people in the east or the west, in the north and the south, adapted to what makes them tick. This is the important thing, what makes them tick. In Slovenia, it could be the same. Perhaps people from this region laugh about different things than the people in another region. So always embedded in the local context, but have a general consistency of the messages. Because the golden principle in communication, I think, the last one, is to be simple. So you need to have a simple message, which is very clear, even if it's about incredibly complex issues like ours, but to repeat it incessantly. So simple messages and repeat always the same. Make sure that the way your minister talks about macro-regional strategies to the people is exactly the same as when you talk or when you talk or when, you know, as much as we control the public communication. So simplicity and consistency, and repeat your messages. Do not expect people to remember because you said it once during a speech or during a conference. Many thanks.
Well, sincere thanks to Dana, who has to catch the plane in a rather short time. So have a safe trip and be quick.
Thank you. I will. I only have 3 hours.
Yeah. Bye. So now we are almost there at the macro-regional strategies part, and I'm pretty happy that I'm able to announce a specific workshop which is happening for the first time. Namely, for the first time, people responsible for communicating all 4 macro-regional strategies will be meeting and discussing among themselves, which I think is already an achievement on itself. But that this is done in a structured manner and that we really see from their work what is the value added. Why are we communicating and having the effort in spending public money in communicating? We have asked Lena Morel as a moderator of this workshop. And Elena, alongside her journalistic activities, which are specialized in the European policy and Franco-German relations, actually was in her life focus also on youth support in running the youth office for the German-Franco relations, but also did co-found the Café Babel Strasbourg as a real believer that there has to be a project that focus on a lean and strong multicultural networks and co-production and use all the environment that we have to achieve the target. So Lena, please, and the members of the panel, thank you.
Yes, hello everybody. I'm very honored to be here today, and very honored especially because I have the feeling that I'm in the middle in a huge brainstorming amongst people who didn't met until now and who make work which is pretty similar in the different regions of Europe. So I'm very happy to invite my panelists today. And I think we will begin from the one of the youngest macro-region to one of the oldest, or more major macro-regions. So I would like to ask Marusha to join. She is in charge, she is the new communication officer of EUSAIR. And she has quite a lot of experience in project management in EU projects. And she is now launching, and after having drafted the communication strategy of EUSAIR. She is working with Mrs. Tina Jucek, so I'm pleased to invite you also to join the panel. Tina is head of public relations at the Agency of Communication Networks and Services of the Republic of Slovenia, AKOS. She is also a former foreign affairs journalist, and she is supporting Marusha in her work in EUSAIR. The next one I would like to invite is Emanuela Zelio. She is a historian specialized in European history and multimedia technologies. She is today here to represent the EUSALP macro region. She is supporting the work of the leader of communication pillar of the EUSALP strategy. I would like also to invite Mattia Wilfan to join for the Danube strategy. He worked for a long time for regional development and cohesion policy within the EU. He was head of office in Brussels for the Danubian strategy, and in charge, of course, also of the communication. And last but not least, I would like to invite Kirsten Eilmann to join the panel. You already heard her this morning making an intervention to present the Baltic macro region. Yes, and you are in charge of, as a project manager of the communication, also of the project who is in charge of the communication of the Baltic region. Let's communicate. Yes, as I said, we have a fresh group here because everybody is still brainstorming about the work of communication offices for the macro region. So what you will experience today is really a live brainstorming amongst the people who are sitting here. We have 4 macro regions which are at different levels of implementation, which have different cultures of communicating to the audience or to a public. And I think that is one of the main issues here also of the discussion today. To make our discussion today a bit structured, before going into really the discussion amongst our panelists, I would like to invite each of our panelists to present the communication strategy of their macro regions. And it's up to you, yes, if you want, as you want, really. So we will first go through presentations of each of the communication strategies so that everyone also here is aware of what is made in the different macro regions to get some inputs and to think about along the discussion. So I would be pleased, Marusha, if you want to begin about the EUSAIR.
Just I'm waiting for Martin to prepare the... Okay, you can go. Okay. Смисъл го ще въртим. Okay, maybe it's better for me to go there. So yes, you hear me? Do you hear me? Okay. So yes, I will present to you EUSAIR Facility Point project. EUSAIR Facility Point project was actually established to support the development or to facilitate the implementation of the EUSAIR strategy. Actually, our work is, we are financed under the Interreg Adrian program, Priority Axis 4. And actually, we are established as a project of 8 countries and 9 project partners. 2 of them are from Slovenia. So the lead partner is the Government Office of Republic of Slovenia for Development and European Cohesion Policy. And then we have 8 project partners. One is also from Slovenia. This is municipality of Izola. And others are national authorities from Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Serbia, Montenegro, Italy, and Greece. So one, let's say, work package of the project partnership is communication, and it is under the authority of the lead partner. And under this communication work package, this is actually the focus of this communication work package is to facilitate the communication of the EUSAIR strategy. Is under us. So what we did, we developed the EUSAIR communication strategy and EUSAIR communication plan. Under this, of course, we define the objectives, we define the target groups, we define the activities according to phases. And now we are in the first phase. So it starts in 2017, and we don't know when the phase will finish, because of course, this phase is very important. You have to raise the awareness, not actually among the media yet, and among the outside stakeholders or outside target group, but actually internal communication. So what we are doing, we have now focusing our communication to the key implementers, limited range of stakeholders, and interested public. What we are doing, we are actually informing them that we exist, what we can offer, what is our role, with the aim to actually engage them, that they will recognize that actually cooperation or common priorities or challenges can be tackled only with strengthening their ties and cooperation. With this, we will actually motivate them to actually start doing some concrete work, and actually the priorities, common priorities among us will be actually recognized as at a higher political level. So what we are still at the level of, how to say, who communicates what to whom. We are at the beginning, so we are not focused on the outside public yet. So yeah, we are telling key implementers what do we do, and of course key stakeholders, what is our role, what we can offer, what we can do. How we are doing this? Through the TCG meetings, we are informing these thematic steering groups. We are actually in charge for content about what we can offer to them. Of course, we also developed tools. This is the website, social media, promotional video towards the Green Coast, which you also see at the official opening. And of course, we are also supporting this kind of events as this one. What we are challenging right now, because we are at the awareness raising phase, it is important to say that we are communicating something broad. We don't have concrete results yet. We are facing with the lack of content. We are communicating potentials. But for our communication to be efficient, as we heard many times today and also in the previous days, is that we need to have something concrete, something with a human touch, concrete people's stories, what has been built, what is achieved so far. We don't have this. Now maybe in this awareness raising phase, this is not so problematic. But when we will switch to the next phase, which is the increasing knowledge, interest and motivation, and changing attitude, which is the third phase, we will have to have something concrete to show, to raise this motivation, to find project partners who will help us develop, macro-regional projects. We are a little bit afraid of this, that we will not get this kind of content, because, of course, macro-regional strategies are also looking for their own, position under the sun, so is communication. And communication officer is not a content creator. We need to get the content from the, let's say, key implementers and from all the others, public, which is in charge for implementing the strategy. So involvement of all the key implementers in this communication process is very important, because we need to get the content somehow, and the next step is how to understand this content, because communication officers at the same time, they are not, experts. So they need to have translation of the content that they are receiving to understand the content. And the third phase is how to spread this content out to the media. So we actually have 3 steps within this communication process. So our first, and most important challenge right now is what to tell and what to actually communicate. Thanks.
Thank you, Marusha. Thank you for your nice input concerning a brand new macro region with all the challenges the communication has to face in this beginning phase. I would be glad if you, Emanuela, go further with the Alpine macro region, which is also quite in young years of its existence. And I'm pretty sure that we will find here some common challenges, but maybe also some first clues concerning the challenges Marusha was pointing out, and what Emanuela will tell us now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for this opportunity to tell you how the process is going within a EUSAIR strategy. So, as you know, well, the strategy was launched in January last year, and more or less we are among the last comers, so we have a lot to learn from the other strategies and to listen. We think that communication means listening first, understanding, learning, then you can communicate something new or something together. So we are in the listening phase. We have 4 thematic priorities, three vertical priorities, one horizontal, which is governance, of course. So the possibility to create content is quite a lot. We have 7 countries, 48 regions involved, and 9 action groups, plus executive board, general assembly, and so on, working on the strategy. So many people around from the different countries. Each groups include 20 to 30 members each from the different countries, different institutions, different careers behind them. So a lot of possibility to tell about content and to work. But we had to face, as all the other macro-regional strategies, with the 3 no's immediately. So no new institution, no new money, no new rules. So the key word is collaborate, try to capitalize the existing resources, and try to harmonize the differences between the countries, which is the biggest challenge. So we try to experiment. We're trying to experiment according to this condition. So the hypothesis is we can communicate together. Yes, we need to try it. How? We start looking for some money. No money available, so we need to present the project. It was presented under the Alpine Space Program. So we were all together, we presented the AlpGov project, it was granted. This gave us some tools, the possibility to develop some tools, but of course we need to respect the rules of Alpine Space program. That means the creation of a specific logo for the project, the necessity for a website, and so on. So since the very beginning, we need to decide what was the message we wanted to communicate, because we need to sediment, to transfer EUSALP identity, which was a baby strategy, but we had to communicate also the project, which was AlpGov. So we had a kind of misleading situation at the beginning, and we had to decide how to do this. Considering the knowledge come from inside, we need to ask people working within the strategy to help to capitalize. So try to contribute to bring out the content. An agency can bring out some tools, but we need people working to produce the message. So, well, the logo was created for the AlpGov, but we try not to confuse it with EUSALP logo. And we try to work on the identity of EUSALP. So, capitalization was the key element. We had to consider the rules, and we had the necessity to consider how to avoid any overlapping or multiplication of other existing structures and messages. But the system was a bit rigid because, of course, each country region has its own rules, strategies, aims, and different players going on together. So we had to try to work in this direction. So the communication for EUSALP was the very first bottleneck, because it was the very first moment in which all of us were asked to work together and to produce choral communication, one only message all together, and it is very challenging, it's very difficult. So the process, of course, is still going on, and this is the necessity to share and to evolve different players in the same game, which is the complexity. Okay, just to show you that, for example, when considering the objective of our communication, when applying for a project, we had to respect the priorities the program gave us. So change behavior, increase knowledge, influence attitudes, of course, were the main elements, but since the very beginning, we had to consider this, even if the strategy was still to be built up. So to try to cope with that, we try to imagine how to work, to experiment. And we created a kind of virtual system, let's say, still, very young system, but what's the possibility to manage without money, without institution, without a central office? Well, maybe we need to consider who are the players, and the players, of course, are the bodies and the groups working within EUSALP, the public authorities, policymakers involved, the stakeholders, the press and the media, the public, of course. And we try to create this kind of mechanism. So, well, we can provide a kind of communication coordination, but then we need people from the groups helping us. So we ask the action groups to nominate an editor or some editors to help us with the content from their own topic, and then try to get in touch with the press offices in the different regions to help in spreading the message. So already existing bodies, nothing new. So the communication staff just working as kind of coordination and collector and providing materials. The European team at the General Assembly, Executive Board, and so on. And the AGs, of course, and the server as the voice behind the strategy. And then all the targets. The point was that, when we talk about communication, we still use the word audience. That means the people you are talking to. But the point is that contemporary communication is calling for a dialogue. So it's not someone speaking, someone listening. It's two people listening each other, talking each other. And that's very difficult because you need to change the plane. So this is the mechanism at the moment. Try to help it with tools like EUSALP website. We are working on a platform of knowledge to get data and to have visualize data about the Alpine region and to provide stories about people, about projects, about success cases in the area. Editors from each group working together and trying to use the communication staff to support them, and then try to talk with the press offices and start spreading information. This is the idea to have a longer life for communication strategies, because at the moment we still have AlpGov project funding it. So it means until June 2019, we have some budget, then we don't know. So the idea is that if we create a kind of virtuous mechanism using existing resources, probably, and still something is going on also afterward, but for sure, to produce qualitative content, money is needed. It's not only up to a single project, it's something more relevant. EUSALP, as all the other strategies, are not European projects. They are higher level, and they need a different kind of probably tools and resources. So, well, also concerning press offices, well, some of them already accepted this. For example, Lombardy region, in our case, offering us the possibility to talk about the strategy through their newsletter, mailing. They provide us some monitors in the train stations to put videos and so on. But it's not the same for all the regions. So it's a very different situation. And the matter is that it's not to buy a new car. It's to have another traveler in your own car. It's already going to car, because press offices are already working for the regions. So, well, just to conclude, some still open point for us, of course, is, well, how can we manage if regions do not agree in the same mechanism, and how can we assure the long run of communication and the impact if it is not clear that we need to dialogue with all the layers. And sometimes we have a problem of think about communication. Well, it's much more easy to think an agency can produce communication for us, but the message is your own message, and you can use their microphone and the agency strategies, but you need to tell them what you want to communicate first. So this is still a very hot point for us, and well, we are working on that to improve. Thank you.
Thank you, Manuela. I really like this notion of experimentation you introduced, because I think it's all about experimentation in the first phase. And you pointed out some challenges which were also already present also by you, Marusha, when you told us the way the strategy is going to be put in place for the EUSAIR. I think, as you said, there is this matter of capitalization of what is already existing. And probably you can have some clues about how to capitalize on this by listening to our next panelists about the Danube region. Mattia, please, with the good practices of the Danube region and the history of communication strategy.
Thank you for the word, and once again, thank you for inviting me. I do challenge your introduction a bit. I would not talk about just good practices, because we also had some bad examples where we were not so successful. But I think the added value is that, yeah, we sit together and we can talk about them openly. And with your contributions, I think they are the motivation how to do things better. So I can only talk about the Danube strategy point in a limited capacity, because Danube strategy point was started as an innovative project as a support office, strategic support office for the 14 countries of the Danube macro region. It was founded in 2015, in June 2015, with a seat in Brussels, far away from the Danube, in the representation of Baden-Württemberg, and it's ending in 202 hours. So it's ending in 10 days. The project is less than in 9 days. The project is ending. But I can tell you what we had the experience in communication in the first phase and what we were planning for the next phase. This is a teaser, a motivation, and we hope that this will be taken up in the future. When we started with the Danube strategy point, one of our key actions was also communication. And the question that we posed to ourselves was, how do we see ourselves in this role? What this office should do? And I think our vision was to be a knowledge and experience sharing or managing center, not more. And we had 3 simple goals for the communication. We said, first of all, we stepped into a jungle. Lots of information, conflicting information, incomplete information. So we said, how can we share, how can we communicate if we don't know what the macro-regional strategies are all about? So I think this was our first goal, was the harmonization and gathering of the data and information. Really important notice to all that communicate the lessons learned was that the macro-regional strategies are not just about the projects. And I think this is the mistake that we often made. We wanted to communicate projects, but this is not all about the projects. And I think this has to be repeatedly continued. So the second point was the language and visibility. We wanted to ask, we really saw that if you go to a meeting like this, you need a translate table, because we don't speak the same language. And with Andrea, we often were asking ourselves, for goodness sake, do we need this translation table? How can we say, how is this beast of priority area coordinated called in another strategy? Is this the same? You look all the time. And I admire the people from Slovenia, because they sit in 3 macro-regional strategies and they have to know the vocabulary, 3 different universes, and they have to understand them. It was not easy. I think the language is really important. It's understandable for internal communication. Yes, we did that, but we have, when we communicate with the outside world, I think the challenge also for this group would be, let's simplify the language, let's come closer to each other. Also was the thing that with visibility. If I ask you, what's the Danube? Do you have an image of a Danube? We even have a logo. Do you know what it's all about? No, there are 2 arches. One of them is golden, the other one is blue. But people forget about that, because in the past years we had the rainbow of this, because each priority had the liberty to change it, to add words, to add wording, and it was losing the momentum, because there are just 2 arches with blue letters saying Danube region, not strategy. Strategy comes just below it, but no, just Danube region. And he wanted to capitalize on that and to be recognizable. And the third point of the education our strategy on communication was to be an education and knowledge manager, the manager of the network. We wanted to, since we have the information, we collect it. We want to also communicate with the people that are actually on the ground, the people that are communicating this. First of all, yes, internal people, but also we started a project to work with the local press, with the regional presence, with the presses. So I think the fourth element would be in communication for all macro-regional strategies is sustainability. I think it has to be done in a coherent, in a sustainable way, in a way that's going on, that's present, and that's the key message. Because if it's not dealt with constantly, if we don't have the exchange of the knowledge as we have now, I think then the communication loses its edge because everyone has to learn from the scratch. But that's not necessary.
I really thank you, Mattia, for this positive input, which comes from an unlucky experience, but very nice insights about what can be done in terms of communication for the macro regions, also for the future. And I think that you had very nice propositions also to make about what can be done between the different macro-regions to optimize the work amongst you and amongst the macro-regions in terms of communication. We'll come back to this a bit later when discussing amongst us, amongst you, about the communication for the macro-region. I would like to invite you now, Kirsten, as a representative for the Baltic region. You know, and I will repeat it, but a lot of people here also know it, that the macro-regions are looking up to the Baltic region. It's like this for a long time now, because every time I'm somewhere hearing something about macro-region, I also always hear, oh, the Baltic region. So we will have some insights about what your work is within Let's Communicate.
Okay, thank you very much. Dear all, dear future colleagues, first of all, thank you to the organizer for this matchmaking, finally. Finally, and we've heard yesterday already, but during today, about the youth and the older generation. So I'm really happy to represent the older strategy here now. Yes. Well, first of all, I was asked to present some messages related to communicating a macro-regional strategy. There are, of course, many, but I chose to just stick with two, which one of them I already said out loud last night, and that is that strategy is nothing without implementation. That's my first message. My second message stems from the experience from our Let's Communicate project, and that is that more coordinated internal communication will contribute to the improvement of external communication. There is definitely a link between the two. So, communication strategy. We have had one since 2015. It was developed by a task force from different organizations in the Baltic Sea region, and then adopted by the National Coordinators Group. And why did we develop this strategy? There was definitely a need for more coordinated and coherent communications of the strategy. This was noticed by the Commission, for example, the National Coordinators Group, to name a few. And what did it include, this communication strategy? Well, for example, among other things, it introduced a set of things that should be set as first priority for the communication for next 2 or 3 years. And then, of course, we have this, but the question comes, who and how? I'm repeating myself, but I just love this slogan here. A strategy, even a great one, doesn't implement itself. So who and how? It was then decided by, in cooperation, Commission, the Interreg Baltic Sea region, to come up with a call announcement for a project on communication of the strategy. And as a result, we developed this, Let's Communicate, for the EU SBSR for the benefit of the region. And we have been, since June 2016, being considered as the communication point for this strategy. And I must mention that these communication channels, the official ones, the web page, Twitter, and these, they already existed when we started. So we continued the good work done already by the Interact Point Turku by that time. And the overall objectives of our project is to build a sustainable network of communicators which has outreach to all of the member states in the region. We have project partners from all the member states in the region, plus Norway as well. So we're pretty well situated there. One of the tasks that we have is to identify the best practices for the communications, and also to think a bit beyond the project time, because we are talking about project money, started June 2016, will end in spring 2019. And as you said also, what happens after that? We'll have to think about that soon. And also, we intend to bridge these gaps, identify gaps between internal and external communications. And in practice, what we do is we support and facilitate the work, communication work that those key stakeholders, these policy areas, for example, are doing. That is what we try to do. And that requires constant context. And I think that's something that we have succeeded pretty well in being in close contact with all the different 13 policy areas, the Commission, the horizontal actions and such, NCs of course, and I think for the first time also the flagships, the project level, that's where the stories come and the success stories stem from. And when thinking about this division of communication between external and internal, the challenge that we have is an external way how to get new possible stakeholders involved, how to present these things in a manner that excites them and how to include them in this field. And then the internal communications, we need a more coordinated and more unified approach. And that means also cooperation between countries. For example, with the national coordinators, we have discussed a lot about the situation on, I'm not going to name any countries here, but let's say that some countries have very much information on their official web pages about the strategy, concretely what it means to people in Finland, for example, and some countries have less. And we intend to and try to unify this situation in cooperation with the national coordinators. So here, just to repeat myself, that the internal and external communications do have a link. And I have here a picture. Oh, maybe not. Maybe I'll just stay here. So I have a picture here of the policy areas and horizontal actions. This is by no means a complete picture of the strategy. It should include commission, national coordinators, projects, and such. But this is just to give you an idea. If you think of this picture here as a model of a business organization, what if Department Energy doesn't know what Department Secure is doing? Where does that lead? What if they do everything differently? What if everything that they communicate outside looks different? Where will that lead? And the question is that where is the added value of the macro-regional strategy then? So what I'm saying here is that the flow of information is crucial in order to understand throughout the overall development and results of the framework or a business, however you want to put it. Because this is where the stories happen. Here, on this level, and of course a level below this policy area level also the projects. We do not talk only about the projects, but we have to talk about the policies and those processes also. And if I think of some concrete examples that we have achieved by now, I think one of these is that we have created, we have an external newsletter, but we also have now an internal newsletter. Because we can really learn from those policy areas among themselves, can learn from the ways that the other is working. It's not only about those success stories that projects create, but it's also about these like boring administrative things you do. Hey, I could do that actually better. And that strengthens the image you have to external audiences. We have also, during the spring and summer, in cooperation with the national coordinators, put up to the official webpage all the memos from their meetings, rules of procedure, because they want to open up what they are doing to those different levels as well. And also, if I mentioned that Department Energy doesn't know what Secure is doing, a good example of cooperation and common interests and synergies is that next month in Latvia there's going to be a seminar organized by Energy and Horizontal Action Climate together. So there are these synergies. They do not work alone, but they should know what they are doing there. And then just to remind everyone, keep calm, implement. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Kirsten. Thanks a lot for this return concerning your experiences in the last years in the Baltic region. I think that you also pointed one thing out, which is, I think, one of the challenges of the EU, which is how do you bring people to cooperate? There are a lot of obstacles for this cooperation, which can be cultural obstacles, which can be geographical obstacles. The regions you all represent are quite different from each other. They are very different within the macro region also. The Danube region has a lot of different countries which are part of the project. The Alpine region has 48 regions within its strategy. So my question would be maybe also for EUSAIR, how would you deal with this cooperation, with this coordination within the communication, and despite the disintegration or the disinterest towards EU affairs, for an example?
Okay, I shall answer this question. I would first like to stress that I don't work for Slovenian government, and I'm here in my personal capacity. Of course, I was hired to draft this strategy, communication strategy. So, in a sense, I then cooperated with Marusha. Well, if you ask me how I understand the strategy for Adriatic and Ionian region, I mean that the main goal or the essence of this strategy is cooperation within the region. And the question here, if we are talking about the content, was, I think that still is the question how to communicate European regional strategy that promotes cooperation in the time of disintegration of the EU, and how to promote it in the region that not so long ago was in the war, at least some countries. So, and if you ask me, I mean, of course we have all the main building blocks of the strategy, of course. I mean, the communication strategy is not rocket science. But I think that to answer the question how to implement the strategy, I think that the key to success is actually collaboration and communication between stakeholders. And when I say stakeholders, I mean not just those that works within the strategy. I'm talking about local, regional, national authorities. I'm talking about, I don't know, policymakers, agencies. I'm talking about business, NGOs, academia, if you want. And I think that, as Marusha also said, we have a problem that, well, first we are the youngest strategy, and then the second problem is that we don't really have a content in our hands right now. But the question now is how to first detect these stakeholders and then invite them and support this cooperation. I think that, for example, meetings, public events are kind of tools actually that we can use, and we also establish some. I mean, we try to establish so-called stakeholder platform that is actually a virtual meeting point. So the aim is that stakeholders could meet somewhere, could I don't know, maybe develop some project, maybe make some joint ventures, maybe, I don't know, exchange the knowledge, maybe, I don't know, exchange the experiences. So I think that we have to find out the way how to actually enable them to meet. I think this is, I mean, you actually told, you were talking about that when you said that your aim is to be a center for exchanging of experiences.
Yeah.
That's it. That's actually capacity building that we are talking about. Of course, and only then I think that we will get the interest of media. Because in a sense, we need some kind of results. I was working in media, covering foreign affairs, I mean, and knowing Slovenian landscape. We have 3 media that covers EU. They have correspondents in Brussels. National TV, National Press Agency, and the biggest newspaper, Delo. In our register is around 90 radio stations, it's around 80 TV stations, and I don't know how many newspapers. I have no data right now, but I mean, and we have 3 houses in Brussels. That shows us that EU is not a story. So we heard today that we need some stories that are interested, of course, for people. And I think that we have to show the results for the citizens. This is then the story. If you ask me how to, I don't know, involve, I don't know, media, maybe we can ask, maybe we can try with local media, with regional media, with some funds, not for the evening news, but for, I don't know, special publications, special, I don't know, emissions, such things.
I think we will tackle the question of how to catch the attention of journalists also in this discussion. But I saw that Mattia wanted to add something to what you mentioned at the very beginning about cooperation.
Well, thank you very much. I couldn't agree more with what Tina said. When I think about the strategy, we want to have results immediately, but I always come back to my studies, to the famous sentence that Rome was not built in a day. And the strategies are cannot be built, cannot give results in a day. I think what's really important, what the strategies are, especially in the case of Danube and the case of the Adriatic Ionian, I think the most important thing is to know that we are building a sense of a region. We're building a sense of a region. I mean that's groundbreaking. Who of you would think, I mean, regional cooperation, if I look at the transport, they're criticizing, not because Slovenia is one of the coordinators of this, yeah, we have to have results in transport, but we are talking about countries that had barricades on the roads between each other just a couple of years ago, and are talking about joint measures. We want to have new corridors, we want to have new paths of transporting goods. I mean, this is really, and it's building a sense. Where do I belong? A few years ago, neither me had a sense of, I belong to the Danube region. What is the Danube region? And I think the only answer to that, how do you build a sense of a region, is through capacity building, through education. And I think workshops like this are an excellent example. And only if we know what the sense of a region is, then we can approach journalists. Because I don't envy journalists, because then you are faced with the jungle, too much information, incomplete information, not really interesting. And I think once you build up the knowledge, the capacity, then only then you can approach, and you know what you communicate, you can approach the journalists, because they are the editors, they are the storytelling. We approached, in the beginning, our plan was to approach, because we communicate in a language that people don't understand. We tell stories. We had a publication, success stories in several languages. For the first time in the Danube region, we celebrated the language diversity because we had a publication not in English but in local languages. But we communicated not in the right way because, yes, it was a teaser. But what we need from the journalists, and I come back to yesterday's intervention, was that the role of local media will be even more important. And I think that's the teaser for them, and the plan was also with Euronet Foundation to try it and to localize the stories, because then that's building up the sense of a region. And I think only through that, through localization, well, capacity building, and then through localization, you can build a sense of a region. And we are doing that. The meetings are building a sense of a region, working together.
Thank you, Mattia. It's very pleasant to hear also the whole engagement which is behind, which is much more than communicating. It's also already feeling the engagement of the communication officers in their region. And I think they are one of the best ambassadors. If we think about what Mrs. Spinnen said in the keynote speech about we need ambassadors of the macro regions. When I listen to the different communication officers or the ones representing their regions here, I think for the moment we don't have better ambassadors than the communication officers themselves. We also said this morning, at one moment in time, I've heard that the job of a journalist is to translate European policy and European issue to something citizens can understand, which is totally right. And I think that from what I heard now is that your job is to translate what the experts are doing into a language the rest of the world can understand. How do you deal with it? How do you deal with this link to create a content, a message from what you get from your experts? Do you have an experience, for an example, Manuela?
Okay, sorry. Yeah, you know, we are starting the process. So we are trying to figure out, to experiment, as I told before. So when considering communication, we had in mind that knowledge is the base, and we need to learn first. So the communication system connected to EUSAIR, since the very beginning, the possibility to have an e-learning area and to provide free content from all the groups to the public. So we are working to develop the kind of tool to allow this kind of transmission. But at the same time, we realize that different targets use different languages. It is not only a matter of national language, it's a matter of code. So we are in a strange situation some way, because we have on one side institution working at the higher level, I guess level with European Union and national coordinators and states, regions and so on. So the political layer sometime working on that. And on the other way, we have stakeholders, we have people, we have media. And all of them use different codes, different languages, different means. So when developing the communication, we try to have to take into consideration not only newspaper, television, and so on, but also social media and tools which allow us to know about people. For example, we developed a system for urban sensing, which is a way to monitor what's going on in social networks, to know what people is thinking, and to provide them the possibility to give us information actively or passively, so we can know what they think about the strategy and how we can improve the way we communicate it. We are at the very beginning, so we need to launch all these tools and to know about the results, but this is the way we want to consider that. And young people use very different media. Yesterday and this morning we discussed about social media. Social media has very different tools from the classic tools institutions are used to manage. So they're always scared about what can go on. And we need to consider this thing, because we need to launch the strategies, but to launch the strategy, it needs active people taking in their hands the strategy. That's young people. But young people, they're using other ways to communicate. So there is a gap some way.
And how do you manage this translation from the expertise, from the level of expertise to the level of communication. You are maybe also in the Baltic region. How do you deal with this, with the creation of the message from the operationals to what you should then explain to others, broad public or the journalist? This first phase, internal.
Yes. Well, as a practical example, I will take something from our web pages, which is blog. When our project started over a year ago, we invited all the policy area, their experts, to write a blog, to say something. What do you want to say? What do you want people to know about what you are doing right now? And we understood that the situation was that some have more resources than the others. Some have one person working fully for that specific theme. Others have somebody doing it a day in a month or something. So we just decided that let's start with the most, I'm going to use quotations, most willing, and then continue from there. So what we have noticed is that when we get this blog text, they usually, well, not usually, I'm not going to say usually, sometimes tend to be very technical, and when I read it, I'm like, okay, I didn't understand what it said, maybe I should ask some questions further. And we have now developed this system of, okay, we get the text, and how do we put this into a more communicative context? The first thing is that we will try to find 1, 2, 3 messages there. If we have to clarify something, we contact the writer. And then we always ask them, what is the connection of your story here to the strategy? Sometimes the answer is, oh, sorry, didn't I write it there? I meant that. Because they take it for granted. They have done it for some time already. But in many cases, it's, the answer is that I really don't know. This is just what I do. This is what my organization does. They are representatives of their organizations, especially big ones. So that's the main thing. We want to get out of their text, what is the connection to the strategy? We usually find it there, but it's not something that you get the text and you publish it. You have to work with it a lot, many times.
Thank you. I think that one topic that everyone was now speaking about in the last minutes is how then bring all this to the journalists, to bring it to the new channel then, because communication is one thing, of course, and then the other thing is then bringing it to the journalists so that they can deal with it and bring it to the broader public. There are really a lot of topics which are related to the challenges of communication, but time flies, unfortunately. And I would really like to, concerning this work with journalists, maybe to ask Mirella to join. Yes, sorry. We will have some questions, of course. I would just ask you if you can join, because we have a nice discussion at lunchtime. Mirella is from Danube Connects. I'm from the Euronet Foundation. We both work as in media, working with cooperation, trying to cover the EU in another way. And we had nice discussions about what would be our expectations from our policy officers who are here to bring our topics in the media. So it was a nice discussion. Maybe you can say a few words about Danube Connects, and then we'll go further with discussion and with the questions of the audience, of course.
Danube Connect is a magazine in 2 languages, in German and in English, and it was founded by Sabine Geller. The next year, the magazine will have birthday 10 years, and it's all about stories, all about the projects, events of all the countries the Danube is crossing, and all the countries from where the river is going into the Danube. And Yeah, we are trying to report about all the things that you cannot read somewhere else, because the media houses, the big media houses, they are not interested to report about it. And the magazine is read from NGOs in the schools, in the universities, even in Brussels, and much of European journalists.
Thank you. So you closely worked also with the Danube strategy. My question would be, if you had the opportunity here to ask our communication officers for good stories you to report, what would be your expectations from our panelists here as a journalist?
We just talked about it during the lunch, and first of all, it's very for us, it's very interesting if we get an email, not on PR text as usual, you know, how do we learn it in the school, the text you just copy and paste, and you put only the differences from the other one. But it's very important, first the lead text, it's really important, and it has, as we talked about it, it has to very interesting. The other one thing, a journalist doesn't have time to read a Word document about 2 or 3 pages. We don't have the time. But what we really like is, for example, is a short video about the theme. So if I'm interested on it, I will contact you, and then I will ask you for some more informations. You know? So give me the time and give me the choose that I'm choosing if I would like to report about it or not. You know? So don't send me books of text, you know, or some press pictures I can find somewhere else. But send me a short one, the best one, video, and then we can decide.
Yes, Mattia, you wanted to. Please.
Thank you. So I can do a bit of a feedback, since we're both for the Danube, strong, convinced Danubians. What we had in mind, maybe this is it was a long-term plan, was to just have an openly accessible but reliable database of the project, of the information. And that would be both accessible for external. The important thing is, again, if you have the capacity, if you know the issues, so if you know the people, the journalists that can access this information externally. But that has to be managed. That's really important. I had the privilege to have the liberty to dedicate, to find a colleague that had the knowledge, that was a hybrid between a civil servant and a journalist, and was dedicated only to that. So he knew how to write a teaser to a world of a journalist. So the idea was to have a database, and then just to send weekly or whatever it pops out, just titles to a network of journalists that we would work together beforehand. I think that's, for us, it's really important. And the second thing is, when you communicate, the preface to that would be just to publish statistics about the region and getting media interested. That's also then, because that's searchable, that's findable, it's also on social media, just publishing. Danube region, place of 100 universities. Danube region, home to 150 million people, to millions of SMEs. And that would be just a teaser, and maybe, I don't know, SMEs now functioning on the border region, creating more income than others on the border region, creating more. And that would be just a teaser sent weekly to journalists. I think that's more important, at least for us, would seem more important than sending newsletters, because people, especially journalists, don't have time to read newsletters. Also internally, they didn't have time to read newsletters. Just send titles, and maybe that's a way out. We saw it like that. Maybe it's a good opportunity. Maybe worth discussing afterwards.
Emanuela, you also wanted to add something.
Yeah, just a short comment concerning what my colleague said, that it's pretty clear we need to speed up. I mean, people do not have time, so need short videos, very impacting videos, titles, but this is very conflicting with institutional times. We spent 2 months to validate one newsletter in EUSAIR. It was the first one, okay, so we need to learn. But that's the measure. social network videos, all these channels are fast channel. And if we want to reach the target, the active target, that's the time. Otherwise, media are not interested. No time, basically. Maybe the content is fine, it's rich, it's good, but no time to go through it. So we need to find the way, and this is really to have another kind of speed, I think.
Yes, of course. Mirella?
The other one thing which is very important is, for example, if I get some PR text and then you can have an interview with this politician or another one. This is interesting, but more important for us is to talk to someone who was part of this, for example, of one project, you know, someone of this village. So, of course, I don't have the time to make some researches. How can I come to this person, you know? So it's also for us, it's also very important that I have someone to whom I can talk, only one person, not 10. Whenever I'm calling, you know, the same number, always there's another one that I'm talking to. And to explain what I would like, what I would have, and so on. So just have someone to whom I can talk and who can bring me to this person I would like to talk, you know?
Thank you. Thanks a lot. You see already, yes, exactly. I wanted now to take the question from the floor. I think it's just very nice to see in how far, very, very briefly, you already have some discussions amongst journalists and communication officers how to try to work better on macro regions. So I think it's something very positive. Now, of course, I give you the floor.
Thank you. Mitja Meršol, Slovenian journalist, retired. When you were talking, I'm very grateful to Tina when she mentioned that there are just 3 correspondents from Brussels reporting back to 3 Slovenian media. But at the same time, I think that it's not so important that we have so many correspondents in Brussels. It's by far more important to start from the ground, what's about European mentality and European awareness. I think that we could do quite a lot if, for example, we engage or we provoke journalists with some kind of good, positive projects that are going on in our neighborhood or in our own country. By the way, we always take European policy and Brussels as our foreign policy. It's our domestic policy. And we should be aware of that. It's our problem. It's our project and so on. It's not European, but it's our European project. And I think that we should really get by far more media support if we approach media with this kind of things. If we approach media with, let's say, with an example from southern Austria, how they use natural resources for energy and so on, being financed also and invested by European money. And how we could use maybe that example in our own country. And it could be interesting for our media to do something about that. Not what's another dictate from Brussels. So I think that it's very important that we start with somehow in a more different way in taking in account that we really start from the ground and see how the things, European projects, also especially for younger people, how the projects as far as education is going on in a macro region to be compared, let's say, education in Italy or Austria or in Slovenia, Croatia and so on, within these macro European projects. I think that that could be the way to do something as far as journalism is concerned. Thank you.
Thank you. I see several hands and one answer here.
Well, I just wanted to say that I couldn't agree more. Okay. I mean, of course, then was my actually option. Maybe we could start with local media here in the region.
That's what I said today.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry, didn't I was not here. Yes, but of course I agree.
Yes, of course, Mattia.
Just a short comment. I couldn't agree more. The strategy is actually bottom-up, should be a bottom-up approach. We, together with Euronet, you can comment on that, we wanted to do, actually, when we collected projects, we wanted to see which countries are participating. And in that country, to make a video. And that was, I think that's the most messageful that you can approach, that people feel that about it. It was about energy, about the parks, there was floods, practical things. And I think this rethink, we should rethink again. And thank you for your help in this.
Thank you, thank you. There were some questions, one here. Well,
maybe some comments, thanks a lot. My name is Jean-Marc Venot, I work in the European Commission in DG Regio. Only maybe two short comments. One is that what we're talking about is cooperation and nothing else, working together. I mean, regardless, the fact that it's within a macro region, in an Interreg program, cross-border, transnational, whatever, interregional, I mean, there are several tools supporting cooperation. What people should be aware of is that there is some European legitimacy to support cooperation in a building with 28 families sharing the same building. Well, 27 in 2 years' time, but I mean, there are two ways of doing. Either you just lock your door when you're back in your flat, and this is one way of living, or you just try to make sure that when the lift is broken down or where the bulb has to be changed in the corridors, there will be people working together to just make sure that the common parts of the building are still in order of being used by all the family, or all the families. And this is somehow where we are. We are in a world where everybody is interdependent from the others, that our economies are interdependent, our environmental situations are interdependent. When there are floodings, it doesn't stop the border and so on. So, I mean, this is something that, of course, we have always, it was said by Dana, we have very badly communicated on the fact that cooperation matters so much at European level. And that whatever the terms we use or the journalists can use, I mean, what should be reported back to the population is that cooperation is part of their daily life. And that their life can be impacted by any kind of actions, of projects, of initiative, taken somewhere else on the other side of the border, taken somewhere else, anywhere in Europe, or that they can learn from others, as it was said, and so on. I mean, this is what we need to communicate on, that we are all interdependent, even though we are not aware of it, or the population is not aware of it. So again, we have a strong responsibility into this at EU level. We have a small budget for sure. We have 110 billion euros for 7 years, which is not that much if you compare it to the 340 billion left for the other part of the policy. But okay, let's do with it what we can. But I think this also, and going back, of course, to something that was raised several times during this conference, the question of education. I mean, we need to be more educational also towards the journalists, but journalists also have to play their part in the education of the population. I mean, when I read the papers, I go on any paper now at the moment, what I see is about the hurricanes, earthquakes, and so on, which of course is a tragedy, and it needs to be reported back to the population and to anybody in the world. But I think sometimes I would also like to find something else in the papers which would not talk about the earthquake, because I know that if I switch on my TV, I will be informed about the earthquake. So if I read a paper, or if I go on the website, I would like to also find something more. So this systematic alignment of news everywhere in the world is something that, as a citizen, I cannot stand anymore, to speak frankly. You know, this is something which is really, which is a pain. So this is one comment. The other comment is that we should not underestimate the maturity of the different phases into the so-called macro regions, any kind of cooperation initiative, meaning that some of them are still at a very early phase. Some other are at a kind of, as Mattia was saying, they have reached this kind of capacity level, you know, where then they can organize their so-called governance, in our jargon, systems, mechanisms to deliver something. In a third phase, where maybe the Baltic is now, which is the kind of maturation or maturity phase, which would be able to deliver some concrete results through projects, for instance, or any kind of development, policy developments, and so on. And I think this is something that should also be explained, that whether you are still at the early phase, the result will be that you get into this cooperation approach, people talking to each other. Rock this morning was saying that 10 minutes from here, they do not even know each other, you know, on the other side of the border. This is the first step. This will be a result, for sure. This will be a result. The second phase will be that you are able yet to build something that shows to the population that, you know, there are things moving in the region for the best, hopefully, of the population. And then in the third phase, the results as such will be those so-called stories and concrete results that you can really base and give evidence to through whatever video and outputs and then results and impacts on. So I think this is something that we both on our side, but also on your side, we should be able to agree on this kind of common denominator of first vocabulary. We are talking about cooperation. We are talking about working together and nothing else, and not working against each other. And the result of this is that this is not a power game. Cooperation is, at the end, that you are winner, we are winner, we are all winners. And we are winners in the way that we are improving a situation that has been defined altogether. And I think it's something that we really should try to build on and to work on. Because otherwise, it's clear that in 10 years' time, macro-regional strategy will still be, if they are still there, will still be something that was just a nice dream from some politicians who, by the way, have already got now to another political agenda, because some of them have already changed their mind in 1 year time. You can also see that from time to time. So there are also those who still needs to be convinced, even though they were the one asking for those strategies. So I mean, this is a huge, huge responsibility, shared responsibility, but I think we have to find it through this cooperation approach, working together and communicate on this.
I thank you for your comment. Before, maybe if someone wants to add something, I just wanted to answer your comment about journalists. I think that you address here exactly the journalists who would like to change things and to see Europe elsewhere than in just one paper magazine or the productions dedicated to the EU. So I totally agree, and I think we have to address all other journalists which are not present today. Do you want to add something? Because there are a lot of questions here.
Thank you. I know what you mean, but on the other hand, it's not the fault of the journalist if you read too much about earthquakes and other things. This is the politic of the media houses. So the journalist who is working at a media house, he has to do it if he wants or not. The other one thing is you're talking about the budget, it's so low. It could be that I'm naive, but I mean, is it not your responsibility to make more, to have more budget for us, for having this this network between us? There are some concepts for doing networking between all the Danube countries, for journalist schools, for developing them, for helping them, but we didn't get the budget of the European Union. So I don't know, but perhaps you also have to say, okay, there is more need about it, so we need more budget for it. I mean, it's not. I just can come to you and say, okay, this is our financial plan. We can do it, but if you don't pay, what to do? So we cannot handle it without financing.
We will talk about the sustainability maybe in a few, as the last questions concerning the communication. Maybe, yes, if you have questions, with pleasure. We have to keep them short, if I may.
Super short. One question and one invitation. The question is, before coming here, I learned that the Slovenian presidency proposed in this EUSAIR Alpine strategy to have quote-unquote a pillar, horizontal pillar on communication, meaning you guys meeting from time to time and discussing communication. Do you think this is a way to go? This is the question. And then, okay, it's quite rhetorical, I can imagine. Yes. And then the second is an invitation, because already since some year we have some network of communication officers dealing with how to communicate EU funds in place in Europe. And we meet a couple of times for a year, and usually the best idea they really come when you share your experience with the others. So the next meeting will be in Brussels. I think you are invited to come, and this will be a good also opportunity to exchange with other people that do the same job as you do.
Thank you.
I don't know, in December. No, in December.
So you will all receive an invitation in the
Yes,
next question.
That sort of goes in the same direction that I would like to go. I work for the local press office in Tyrol, who will have the presidency in 2018 of EUSAIR. And I like the idea that you do want to ask us to help you, because I think that's the only way to get to the local journalists. Because it's, as you said before, it's a bottom-up strategy. And I have the feeling, listening to you all explaining your different strategies today, it's a very top-to-down strategy, because we haven't been involved at all. And also talking about the budget, I mean, I already work for the Tyrolean government. I have my pay, so I'm here already being paid. I don't understand why we haven't been involved more often or asked to help you in this thing, because we already have the experience of working together with different regions, like Alto Adige, Trentino, and Tyrol work together. We have the AG Alp, and we have the experience of communication officers from the press offices working together and implementing different tools.
Thank you, Emanuela.
Yeah, we will do this for sure. I mean, it's not only one single group needing to do that, it's a common will, and all the action groups need to invite journalists. And this is the aim. You know, we are at the very beginning. Now we are under the definition of the EUSAIR strategy plan, and all actions are starting now. Many groups are starting organizing workshops, meetings, and so on in these months. So we had some months of preparation, let's say, and now tools are almost ready, and the groups are working. So for sure, media need to come in, and yeah.
This is not media. We already, the local governments, the public relations offices of the governments already have the tools. We are not journalists. We are the people who have the connections to the journalists.
Yeah, for sure. And that's why I show you the mechanism we trying to arrange. That is, the groups are working through editors and get in touch with the local press offices and institutions to disseminate contents and actions. So that's the process we are starting now. So
it seems to be very complicated. I'm sorry.
I'm sure that the experimentation of EUSAIR will bring a positive end to this collaboration, cooperation. Mattia, you wanted to add something, is it right?
I mean, we were challenged at the beginning, if I remember Andrea's contribution rightly, that you would like to have at the end some recommendations. And I saw, well, the question from you actually came as a rhetorical one. I saw the colleagues here nodding, and I saw the nodding. One of the recommendations would be, yes, this is a cooperation process. So let's take it from here. Would be a recommendation that this shouldn't be a one-off, right, the capacity building of the communication officer. But more importantly, that this doesn't stay within, top-down, but it stays also the bottom-up, so the two sides meet. So that would be the recommendation, that in the future, that is and important is that this is a permanent process of capacity building between the communications officer and then including the local, the representatives of regional offices, of local authorities, and the media, to invite them for joint capacity building. If that could be, I don't know.
It's a nice recommendation. Yes,
recommendation.
Thank you. I take a last question. There was a question here.
Thank you very much. My name is Yuri Giacomelli, representing consultancy Giacomelli Media. And first of all, I really like to praise this dialogue, and I think what Matteo actually wanted to do by setting a rhetoric question is to actually praise this as well, and support the fact that such an open dialogue across the regions is taking place. I have two questions for you, actually. I think you offered a number of insights and also shared some frustrations, you know, like waiting for 2 months before you can publish a press release. But there were some, I mean, obviously quite some achievements in those more senior regions. And but all this brings me down to asking you a question on who and a question on what. the question of who, and I would really like to know whether you have come across this and how have you, tackled the who question. Because I am very much aware from experience that you cannot take away the message from the messenger, right? It's really, really hard. It's impossible, okay? It's impossible. So by saying this, who is the communicator? How do you define the who, the person? How do you actually find the subject? One thing is, of course, writing the press release, editing the press release, aligning the press release, and going on vacations and coming back and realigning the press release. I've done that in my life, so I know the degree of frustration. But then the real question is, who communicates? Who stands for that? I would really like to hear your experience about that. And the second one is goes back to the keynote speech, about and the gap that Mrs. Spion exposed, about the lack of awareness that when our telephone bills improve, or when fresh water comes from our taps, we actually don't associate this with some positive action at the EU level, at whatever level of the EU. And so how do you translate things? And Mr. Wilfan said it's not really just about projects, and I really like that. So how do you do this exercise to translating, project goals, or the ambitions that once you're insiders, of course, you define it in terms of projects, processes, whatever. How do you translate this into benefits for those out there? Thank you.
Who wants to answer those two questions, or at least one of the questions? Kirsten, Mattia, Marusha, Tina, Emanuela? All at the same time.
Choose the messenger, but don't kill the messenger. Kill the message. It's not an easy question. What we said about who, what we have, in the Danube, that's so diverse, it's really important to have a person, to have a point where the information comes together. Because otherwise, in 14 countries, so diverse, language, culture-wise, whatever you want, gets lost. What we did, our philosophy was, maybe it was completely wrong, I would more than happy to hear your feedback. But what we did is, we heard the information from a project, from an initiative. It was not a project, it was an initiative from a corporation that started. We just put it in, what was our role was a short message. What really was all about, who did it, and information to connect with that person. That was our role. So our message was what, who did it, and how to connect. We didn't translate it furthermore, because then we would lose the edge. Also, we were often criticized that we are too short in our strategy. Because, for example, for the Danube strategy, we did the endless card. So you flip it 4 times, which is a small format, smaller than this one, and you flip it over, it's just pictures and virtually very little text, but with context, just to tease you. And that was the philosophy that we had, just to take the main message and to who did it and to relate to that. What about the goals? What we had it's really important when you build the communication officer. It's not me now, I'm being praised for the work that others did, but the philosophy within the unit, within the office was that also a communication officer has to know a bit about he was involved also in the policy-specific issues. So he had the knowledge. He was, as I said, a hybrid, civil servant, but also a journalist. He had a journalist background. And he was trained that he understands what the goals are as they are spoken in the gibberish of the public administration, the policymakers, and so on and so forth. And then also to translate it into a language that's more acceptable or easier understandable. And I think this, again, a capacity building, that you have to build a person that is able to translate this into a more language. But really importantly, second thing, that he has a network of people that he can go back to. That's why we had an excellent work also, more or less, with some with the priority area coordinates always being asked, so how is this translated into, let's say, more understandable language? I don't know if that answers your question, but it was a try.
Thank you.
I will try too. Yes. Who communicates? In the Baltic Sea region, I'm going to answer that our project communicates. It is the communication point for the strategy. And that means that we work for that if somebody wants to know about the cooperation in the region, they contact us. We get lots of contacts people asking to come and represent the strategy on some event or something. And then, of course, we look at the context and we connect these people with those who actually know about the bioeconomy or climate or whatever. But we are the contact point. We don't have all the answers to all the questions, but we'll try to search for the answers and then connect those dots together.
Can I also add something? Yeah. I will just talk about the EUSAIR. I totally agree with my colleagues. Answering the question who, I understand your question, not who is actually the messenger, but who has the ownership of the message. Or this was the wrong, I understand you wrong. Because the communication officer is actually the messenger, but from my presentation, the communication officer cannot be the creator of the message, can be a transmission point and is some sort of also a creator. But to be a creator, he has to be or she has to be involved also in the content creation. Can be with big capacity building, so you are, try to build a communication officer who also has a policy knowledge, or you involve policy officers in a, institutionalized daily exchangement of information flow between the communication officer and the expert or a policy officer. But this can be probably time consuming. So I don't know what would be a solution, but these two areas has to be, let's say, combined together. Otherwise, you're just having communication officer, you're hearing something, and you're just spreading out. This cannot be done, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, concerning EUSALP, we don't have any central point to deliver information messages, so we ask each group to provide editors. Editors is not just writing, but is the person collecting the feedback and the message from his group, his or her group. So representing in some way the will of the members of the leader or leaders, and publishing that kind of content. In fact, in the website, for example, each editor can edit its own page and produce the content coherently with this group or subgroups, so with different topics and messages they want to deliver.
Thanks a lot. As we come to an end, I would like to ask one final question to the panelists with a short answer. What do you think would be the macro regions without communication? Yes. Sorry? Yes. How important is communication for you to build up the macro region strategy?
Well, thank you. Macro region without communication, I think then we would have to ask, what is macro region? Because it's kind of like the point that if you have the macro region strategy, but you do not tell anyone about it, it doesn't really exist.
So we would have a paper. So without communication, we would have just a paper, you know, the strategy that is written there. That's it.
So to bring into life the strategy. Mattia?
I was in the black group yesterday. But so I would say it would be just a good dinner. It would be just a good dinner. So yesterday we said it's macro region strategies are, we don't have a clue, but the dinner was good. I think without the communication would be just a dinner, or and I think that's just a dinner, or even a bad dinner, because people wouldn't know each other, or even don't know without a dinner, or dinner without a guest.
Thank you, Mattia. You want to add something?
Yeah, I will, how to say, present my point of view through communication. So, of course, it's important to talk. And more you are talking, the better it is. But it's also important to talk smart. So maybe you should talk less and more smart.
Fine, thank you. Emanuela?
Yeah, I think it will be just an empty box. We need the communication to have the content. Content is the relationship between people. Without communication, you are just producing words or rules or whatever, but empty, without any content inside.
Thank you. So we point out once more the importance of the sustainability of the communication for the macro-region. I think that within this panel we had some nice beginning of recommendations coming out. It's all about cooperation now in the months and years to come. Each of you have a lot to learn from each other. We have a lot to learn from you and the other way around. So I think that you will be stronger. We will be stronger by working all together to make macro-regions known by all. So thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you a pleasant day.
Thank you all. Thank you for this insight and exchange among yourselves. But as Kjersti already said, there is no strategy without the implementation. And the conclusions from last year's Mediterranean Coast and EU Macro-Regional Strategy Week was one of the proposals to have a common horizontal pillar on media and communication for all 4 macro-regional strategies. But to give the recommendation is easy. More important and more difficult is how to implement it. So in order to try to come also to the implementation part, we did ask an experts to look in the 4 macro-regional strategies, but this is a desk work, not the live communication which we were just present, but to look at the papers, in particular, not to say this is really good and this is bad, but try to find, are there common elements in the 4 approaches? Could we build on these common elements, and is there sufficient content in order that we are able, from the professional expert point of view, to create something which would be a kind of a draft roadmap to derive to the horizontal pillar. And I'm delighted I can invite again Stoyan to share with us the result of this assessment from the expert point of view. Stoyan, please.
Thank you, Andrea, for this introduction. Because you did a little bit of my work already, I wanted to explain the context for you not to be too harsh on what we did. Because basically, I think there is a certain risk in what I'll be presenting. For the insiders, there will be too little, because you already today explained more than we knew. And for, let's say, outsiders, it will be too much because there will be too much detail. So I will try to struggle in between those two. But let me just start with something more personal. When you spend a whole day with somebody, I think there are 2 good things. One is that you can take your jacket off, and second is that you can talk more bluntly. To me, the insight of this afternoon is that, in fact, that it's not so rosnato, it's not so optimistic that it looked in the morning, because, honestly, there is one facility point, there is one project, there is one strategic point, and there is one communication point. 2 of them are very self-centered. One is about to be closed, and the only one is maybe robust enough to survive Nordic winters of this Game of Thrones. So, in a way, you gave me the idea of talking about the Nubians. Imagine these 4 regions, macro regions, as the kingdoms: the Nubians, Alpines, people from the sea, and the Baltics. And you know that there is not always just war between those kingdoms, but there are also very, very interesting intrigues, stories, and everything. What we had in what our task was, Mateusz and mine, was to do a preparatory process in order for, let's say, the Slovene point of view, because this is really a particularity of somebody who is in I would say, one perspective for 3 different regions. If there is a way to go forward, the task was divided. Mine was analytical, and Mateusz was the, let's say, the action plan, how to optimize, so the roadmap, as you usually like to say. It's a pity that he's not with me, but unfortunately I do both. And just for you to know what our result, which is really just an interim result, but based on what I've heard here today and based on what will be then combining together, there will be something that I would be pleased to say it's our work. For the moment, it's really a work in progress. What I did is, I did a content analysis of 4, not just strategies, but what you do, and I tried to detect the common strategic points and a few key tactical tools. And then, going through best practices, I dare to give some recommendations to Andrea, basically. And then, second is Mateusz's work, which was really optimization. So he was much more into method, into process, and into possible areas of work where you, together, out of a certain common knowledge, you would profit something. And very simple table of content of this presentation today is, first part is mine, second part is Mateusz. I'll talk about strategic points and tactical tools, practices and recommendations, and from his material I will take explanation of method, suggestion of process, and the areas of work. But as soon as you go a little bit into the details of areas of work, you will again find tools which are all the way up as tactical tools and processes that are necessary to go there. I don't like tables. I will not go into details of what you show, and also here I have to, not really to apologize, but to explain that in fact the Danubian one was the only one that was not articulated as a strategy. I used the communication plan, I used your material, but this is also just an insight that in fact the 3 others started with articulating these positions and you started to work. And in the results of your work, sometimes it's seen in a positive way, I would say. Here, talking bluntly, I was very much interested into the Alpine way of getting the strategy because they were criticized, and through the criticism, they needed to understand better whom they are, in fact, talking to and whom they are listening to. And that's why this will explain to you why, in my opinion, the mission, aim, and goal is very, very much close to the Baltic ones, because literally they took as an example. This is not what we are really interested in today, because this is something that is put in the, not the first, but the 3rd page of the strategy as something to start. Why I put this table? Because you see there is a basic difference in content in the central one, the Adriatic-Ionic. And I think this is one of the things to consider here. They didn't just put phrases. They were immediately thinking about target audiences. So when they speak to leadership, it's about advocacy. When they speak to target groups, the other target group, it's about social mobilization. And when they speak about individuals, they even dare to mention the attitude-changing communication. So it was no surprise today that you are already only at the stage 1, because up to the stage 3, there is a long way to go. But knowing that, in fact, you focused your first part of communication on very concrete advocacy for certain, this is understandable now knowing in which stage you are. What is in a way more, not more, but yes, more evident is when you go to the level of tools. So I will not go into the strategic points, because here you could see that in a way you could learn from each other even in the level of wordings, which is not always the best, because it would be better to translate the strategic pillars of your strategies into communication wording. But in tools, this is where it gets interesting. First, we can compare all 4 columns of the table, and some of them are evident. For example, of course, you all have web and social. You all have something to do with print in general, but some of you called it communication material, some publications, some branded material even. You go into events, and interestingly enough, not in all direct tools, media are recognized as such. So what I did two things. I was first searching for something that is outstanding. It was more to ask you during the debate, for example, whether the stakeholder platform is just a virtual idea or is something that is really working, because that would be interesting for other partners to know, because I understand if you start with the advocacy, how important it is that you have this developed. On the other side, the Danubians, if you allow me this word, were really concrete about fact sheets, infographics, and one-pagers, which is a nice way to think about your tools, because then it's really, you know, how to focus. It's not about press release in 2 months, it's do I have enough data to create an infographic that will immediately correlate with somebody who is a specialist maybe in some media reduction. And I don't know personally the outcome of the optional idea of establishing an annual award. In some cases it's very interesting, in some cases it's simply too much of a work for something that doesn't directly create results. So on one side, the serious debate later on, and you will see from Mateusz designing the process where this debate can take place and time even, this is to bear in mind, not so much where you are all aligned or unified, as you say in other contexts, but where you are outstanding and where some things are missing. And again, they are not missing from the implementation, because you could not implement without visual identity. But the fact that you didn't reflect this into your strategy means that, in fact, you don't really think it's important, because it was not written as one of the key elements. On the other side, I really think that the fact that there is no media or events in this concrete tactical tools plan mean that you didn't have the time to do the conceptual strategy. If something is not clear, or if you're factually incorrect, please, yes, tell me immediately. Okay, thank you. That's what I'm saying. This is really, as Andrea said, yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. I think for the serious academic paper like this is not, we should go to regions and talk with the target audience and see the results. Now, once you are on web and on material, you know that you are not in real life. But this is really where to start. Best practices is more tricky because, again, I mean, I thank Mattia that this is not a gender now exercise. You know, me preaching to a group of ladies, or on the contrary, an old professor talking to young students. But please don't take this as a academic exercise, but more as a provocation. For my personal reading of strategies, the Baltics were the best in linking between messages and concrete, tangible projects. In literally translating what was done, not necessarily meaning projects, tangible projects, but what we are doing, where the messages are coming from. I mentioned already this Adriatic-Ionian distinction between advocacy to leadership and social mobilization of target groups. To me, it's really one of the key insights how to start the strategy. But in general, I think that the key topical pillars, and if you go on the web and you see the key topical pillars for each of these macro-regional strategies, they do dictate stories. So when you were explaining the problem of if this would be a company with two departments, when you are translating these metrics into the messages, it goes very well together. Because I suspect, because they're reflecting a certain homogeneity of the strategy as such. So there could be no good communication strategy if the macro-regional strategy behind is not clear, at least. If not, in the messages there will be contradictions that are inherent to the I try to group them into three categories. These are, let's say, more strategic accent. On the formal processes, the way how the strategy was written, I think Baltic did the best in these work packages. This could be a lesson for all of you, how in fact you conceive your work, your practical work, how work packages should be packed in order to help your work and not just for the auditors to make click later. I think this is really a good practice. And again, they were both the new Alpine and before the Adriatic-Ionian were insisting on monitoring and evaluation, not just per se, but explaining why it is important, and even on this budget importance. It's not pleading for money, it's linking what they expect from us with what we can afford. As let's say, implementation successes, I think you, from Alpine, you mentioned the visuals, and really I think your web is showing how much it's also linked with the with the landscape, but doesn't matter. Maybe it's our Slovenian perspective. Your web shows how important the visual layer of the communication is. I apologize if I called the brochure for the beginners, but this was really the typical example of how simple, in fact, the complex things can be said. But in general, I think, and this is where I share Mateusz's view, web pages are already showing a certain consistency. And this is, if I have to speculate now, the answer to you. If you go to web pages, horizontality is already there. And why? Because this is the tool that allows you this. Whether it's translatable into reality or even more into managing processes, this is the question that was not luckily asked to me, but to Mateusz, and you will see his answers. But my recommendations, again, are grouped into 3 sets. One is the experience exchange, and you are telling us now that meetings make sense. Not these meetings per se, but meetings where it is allowed to participants to focus on concrete challenges and to share their practices. I think, again, I'm talking now from the EU, 3 years, it really helped us. The communicators were meeting twice, once in one of the countries and once in Brussels, and this was really useful. It was not about dinners, it was about getting to know on Monday morning what you will do better than you did. Then, of course, always when people gather like this, they think, now with all this virtuality, there could be a platform where we would put everything there. There is an idea, of course, for such a communication archive, but it's really tricky how it's first conceived and then managed, in order not to just be the rupotarnica, you know, somewhere you just throw things after you have done. No, but you will see again from Mateusz that this came out through both of our processes. I was afraid to put number 2, but after listening to you today, I see that there is this frustration. There should be more professional implementation. Simple people, you say about there is content creator and there is communicator. I mean, communication is a profession, and the question how to, not just to write, but to speak, to shoot, to direct, to take photo. I mean, without this, you prove you are not at the level of the one that is expecting your message. So it's not just about hiring professionals to draft communication strategy, which was obvious today. No, I think there's also the question of where you know your limits and where you have to outsource. Not always, not necessary, but the professionalism should be the criteria. And then the question I provoked Barbara this morning is about this joint distribution. So if I just remind you, so on one side this experience exchange, there is this more professional implementation, and third recommendation is, in spite of all this virtual world, broadcasting is still a tool. And the more you go to regional, local, the more this content stayed in minds, maybe more than just a few clicks or likes, for sure. So an idea of a joint program in collaboration with several public broadcasters, with so many member states and with so many regions, should be at least an attempt, and we'll see what. Moving to Mateusz's part, he didn't, as he likes to say, invent rocket science. He used something that is there on the market. But for us that are in communication, it's not always obvious that, for example, from design process, we can learn something that helps us sharpen our minds and then also the acts. So he's proposing something that was basically defined by UK Design Council, known as Double Diamond Design Process, which was, of course, primarily developed to support the development of products and services. But he thinks that it's applicable to even to a process that you are now into already, not at the starting point. And I will point out exactly where he thinks you are. Andrea liked very much this A and B stage, because the A stage is do the right thing, and B stage is do the thing right. And of course, do the right thing means that there is this time where you have to discover and define the task worth being done. I think we are already there. I think we are in this, let's say, task-finding mission, where if you know well how to discover and define, it will be then more possibility that the right problems will be solved. For example, as Mateusz said, enhancing the quality of solution, but very important here, saving time and resources, or fastening time, because frustration is also too much time. If you know what's the right thing, then you should also, and this is the professional part of it, know how to do it right. This part of the process is about solving the problems, about the one that were identified. And this is now about solution. It's not just these little two caros. I mean, it's much more complex, and some of them know them. I will not go into all the details. Just for so, my intuition is that we are exactly at the point between the two. It's not only that you discover you have a problem, we are very close with all that was said here in defining the problem. Now the key question is, look, the second quarter is a definition phase in which we try to make sense of all the insights and possibilities identified in the previous phase and set the strategy for the next stages. And this is where we, the experts, should shut up, and Andrea and the rest of you from the decision-making process should continue. Why? Because with all this insight put into a bottleneck, as one said today, there is a serious chance that there will be a development and delivery. Development where solutions are created, prototyped, and you recognize the language where it comes from, tested, and iterated. But to deliver, and this is where I think not the communication strategies, but the macro-regional strategies should be interested, is the delivery phase. Is there a chance that the final quarter will happen where the solutions will be finalized and launched? The key activities and objectives during this stage are, again, think about product, and our product is communication. Final testing, approval, and launch, and so on. Of course, it would be unprofessional to stay with this just scheme. Mateusz went into details, and he said he wanted to define stakeholders of this process and then the general approach, how to continue. He explicitly asked me to say that a part of those in the theater who thinks that are the stakeholders, it is very important to reach to one who conceptualize and produce the content. So we should meet these people, you should meet them at a certain moment, because it's their insight is also very important. It's not only the frustration of the editor, who is in deadline, it's also of the one who gets 6 different instructions at the same time and don't know exactly who is telling to him. And then there is also the question of, you mentioned, sustainability of managing of this communication. As Mateusz said, they are the ones that can make or break the task ahead, and are those who will help assess the long-term viability or, as you said, sustainability of these solutions. The A and B stage is obvious, and I will not go into details because it's more or less the repeating of the scheme. But what really I think it should be the final point of my presentation are the possible areas of work, and here both Mateusz and me cross our know-how. So what we'll see is in effect already the result of our common work, because we think that there are 3 levels of possible optimization. Is the content. So now I'm talking what do 4 macro-regional strategies can gain if they do a step ahead together on the level of content. Can it be better, and how? Can some of the processes, because are more participative, can be or more efficient, or cheaper, or faster, or simply better? And then is there some innovative tools to be invented for this? Of course, as you imagine, the biggest chart is the content chart, and I hope you can see. But basically, this is what a designer, what Mateusz is, a process designer, and the former copywriter and creative director that I was, see as a potential gains of common content. There will be a certain content that is shared by all strategies, as I proved with the first strategic chart. So describing their roles inside the general framework, as well as some general missions and mechanisms. This is clear that there could be an interaction. And then immediately jump to a very pragmatic thing. Are there some graphs, schemes, maps that if you find on 4 different websites, show that there is a certain coherency between them? It can go to common audio and video material. Of course, not all directed by the same or produced by the same, but having this kind, hey, we are talking a bigger story. Sorry for this parallel, but imagine that it's a series, which is the Game of Thrones, and then there are different regions. There are pictograms, there are typographic systems even. Mateusz is the creator of the typographic system that Slovene public administration is now using, which was a big breakthrough because it was not obvious that not every ministry would have it their own. Common visual identity system is already more tricky because there could as we think, is just maybe using some of the elements from a common pool of symbols and color palette. Maybe to avoid a little bit too much similarity, but of course not to unify. And then it's not about the common website, for sure not, but about the common management system, which is in a way already in place there. The participative processes, although very complicated matter, is much shorter table and is almost one sentence. After cataloging existing processes, and many of them are done already now, and assessing good practices, I think we could set up a periodic evaluation on a common platform. That's what I said. If you meet, you have to evaluate your work, but maybe some residuals of these meetings can be a common platform. And then, are there some innovative tools? It would be too early for us to come and start make a list. But what we think is that there could be innovation both in the content creation and in the management support. So some of the verbal, visual information elements can be more, let's say, structured, but even what you need to your own work, like instructions, manuals, standards, could be more close to each other. And of course, some of the content that is already created can be shared by one team and used by others. But all the time have in mind that we are not forgetting that there are different target audience and different strategic tools. It's not about getting one brand. No. It's really about optimizing, as the title of his work was. But once you are meeting and you start to spare your per diems, you start to meet online, to exchange lessons and asking colleagues from other regions. Maybe there will be from some, like we discussed the question of hunger and poverty before, maybe there will be some other macro-region somewhere else to exchange some. And finally, a debate about the joint distribution of common content is relevant in this sense. Once you're more closer together, maybe it's easier as a kind of power group also to speak with public broadcasters. So, and the last slide is, we wouldn't dare to make conclusions, you should do it, but Mateusz is thinking that this proposed process is flexible enough to be used in different ways, literally depending in which stage you are and what time and resources do you have. And he uses a phrase that there is enough low-hanging fruit. I didn't know this expression before, I like it. There is enough low-hanging fruit even now here to start, you know. So don't let them waste and rotten. Start with what is enough already at the reach of your hand in order to start creating a good marmalade. But in any case, what is important is that these conclusions and proposals are really validated and signed on by the stakeholders before the second stage. So that's why we are at this, let's say, peak of the first square, because without this, it will be just a nice meeting in Porto Roche. Only in this way we think but also us creating this will be able to provide operational, practical, and let's say viable or sustainable solutions. And that's the end of slideshow. I don't know if we have time for any, you know.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Stoyan. I think, as it was said, this is preliminary. It will be upgraded after the end of this conference. So I don't know, and then shared. I hope so. So my question is, do we need to discuss, reflect to this now? Can we take the coffee break to do this? What is your preference for the time being? It's the coffee break, the time for discussion? Or you want... Sorry? Okay. Coffee break. Okay, so we are here in 4:30 for the concluding part. Okay, thank you.
Aha, staš.
A vse stole?
Ja, lahko, ena miza lahko ostane tako, kot je, ta zložna mi je ostala. Da...
A pol samo predavanje naprej, ni diskusije več?
Ne, ne bo več panelistov, tako da...
Okej.
Hvala.
This was last year. This year we would like to see whether we can move the three-level proposals which Stoyan just gave. So the recommendation to do the right thing and to do the thing right, if we agree with this. But the question for the next year, shall we do it? I mean, this is a proposal, but nobody really said, yes, this is the way we
Well,
do
it
it.
insists that if we don't do it, basically we are not going to speak about macro-regional strategies in the future.
Yeah, of course. But this is a question to be addressed. Shall we do it? The second, who could do it, and how to organize ourselves. So, in order to answer, our proposal would be that we propose or invite that the macro-regional strategy high-level group, so we first go and speak with high-level group, invite all four macro-regional strategy actors responsible for governance and communication to act in line with those recommendations. So we have somebody to give us the mandate to work in this framework, invite the Commission to further support, which is, without your support, we will not be able to do. And in a year time, at least, we come and see. So this is the process of, let's say, continuous process that we are starting to work in this. And these are my conclusions, nothing else.
Okay. Hold on, I keep your... Okay. I will support you first on the need to work harder on the single horizontal message to be given. At this stage, I'm not aware that we have a clear concept of what a macro-regional strategy is. I mean, and it was indicated at several occasions that we need to use the same message, the same word, simple, sharp, to communicate again and again. What is a strategy? What is a process? We need to have a few words that are well presented, and which request totally common work. Second, I highlight the fact that indeed, if we look at the target audience, it's very important that we target the population of the region. That's a bottom-up process, accountability. But third, we should not forget that in addition of the bottom-up process, there was a totally top-down process, which is the way the Commission has been taking the strategy to make them communication of the Commission, and the way resources have been allocated. And if no EU support was given, we would not be here. I mean, I will recognize your work, but it is, we are at the merging of your effort this year and also EU support. And then if I take the fact that discussing this in Brussels is very important, we need to look at this is post-2020. And today we are not in a good position for post-2020. New priorities, we discuss that. So we really need to shape also the action in Brussels together. Fully ready to see the way we can help you, but also we need to look at third-party endorsement. Are we going to find champions in the parliament? I believe Stoyan can be helpful in do that. I don't know how willing he is, but...
He's freelancer.
He's freelancer. But we need to have, let's say, it's very important because at the end, What I see is that think tanks, for instance, are extremely useful. They are extremely present in Brussels, and they do events which are always attended by a few hundred of persons, which is important because there are lobbies, there are thinkers, commissioners are coming. So we need to think the way, and then we need to deliver a consistent message in Brussels. And there I have in mind that we cannot have strategies being presented one way and then some national programs trying to run.
Yeah, exactly.
I will present it in a positive way.
slides for my presentation. I will try, but we have three cameras that... okay. Or at least reduce it on this particular spot, that would be brilliant.
There's this door on the 10th floor of the Vox Media office that I hate so much.
Tu étais dans la salle maintenant? Non. Ah, c'est la présentation. Elle était bien? Ah, merde. C'était bien, elle a fait une analyse de la stratégie de communication. Ah, ok, wow, super. Mais très académique, toi, plus prospective. Ouais, ok. Communication, peut-être des choses. C'est filmé, c'est ça, hein, tous les trucs là, donc je pourrais peut-être regarder après, ouais, je pense. Il a fait une étude. Ouais, super, super. Excellent. Excellent. I'd like to use an NL mic.
You have to push.
Okay.
For
1 second, okay. So this one is connected, okay, great.
stay. I have to confess that we do not learn very much because every time we organize something, we said, next time, we will shorten things because in the end, people become too tired. But we didn't learn this yet. Sorry. Not to take any more of time, I would now like to invite our last speaker, Mr. Charles-Louis Jourdain, the creative director of Old Continent Communication Agency, and his input will be a little bit different to what we have been discussing and listening today. Without saying anything, Charles-Louis, the word is yours.
Thank you very much. So the title of the session, Communication is a two-way street, and it starts by asking questions. Basically, it's a very operational approach to communication and how to actually pass your messages with journalists. My name is Charles-Louis Jourdain. I'm 34 years old, French. I'm a creative consultant for a communication agency called Old Continent, okay, based in Brussels. We've been working a lot lately, piloted more than 300 projects myself, and trained more than 1,000 people in strategy of communication and the rest. So I kind of start to understand your world. These are some of the people I trained lately, and for you maybe more interesting, Interreg, Interact Network, and the Inform DJ Regio network as well. I didn't know anything about macro region before coming, so it's like 2 days of intensive training. I think I start to get it, but still I need some additional help. Basically, the main thing, the main insight in all my training is that 99% of the people I'm training never ask to their target audience how they can be of help in terms of communication. 99%. That's 10% on 1,000 who actually asked 10 minutes to their target audience, am I helpful for you? That's very bad. The most important thing in communication, in advertising, in marketing, is to get an insight in your audience. If you enter their head, if you know how they think, then you can actually pass a message. Every creative campaign in the world that performs starts with an insight. We started our career, let's say, in communication by launching the first and only, I think, t-shirts about the European Union. So complete commercial failure. I think we never broke even. Super good communication campaign. That one article, The Telegraph, generated more than 250 comments. We got featured a bit everywhere with these t-shirts. And then we created a web series called Eurobubble, which tells the story of people working and living in Brussels. I'm just letting the intro so that you know, and you can discover it later if you want on the internet.
After a few years working here and there, I moved to Brussels. My old Erasmus friend Philip was there already, so I had a place to crash.
Well, my friend, welcome to the Eurobubble.
Thank you. All I needed was a job.
So if you'd like to check the other episodes, there are 12 of them, 500,000 views more or less in total. I think we get more than 100 press articles thanks to this series. Okay, and there's one reason why we did that, and we actually renewed that thing later with a sort of alternative fake spot for the European elections, where we got more than 5 million views being featured at 8 o'clock in France on TV. That's what you try to get, okay, when you're communicating. Most people do not really understand the difference, so I'm saying it again because I know that from 1,000 people I've trained. Earned media is when someone opens his audience to you for free. When you're talking to a journalist, the guy has an audience, okay, and he has a readership. When he's telling a story in your name, through his own media, he's telling that to his own audience, and you're earning that. You're earning a great deal of attention. When you're on your own website and you have 300 visitors per month, basically you have 300 visitors per month and that's it. Here you can get much more. Earning media is the whole strategy you're after when you're contacting journalists. I took a lot of questions from you from the questionnaire, so there will be no question actually because I'm running fast in the training, but I will deal with most of them. So I tried to prepare answers, and the first question I had was how to communicate the content in an attractive and understandable way. Well, you have to understand your audience all the time. That's the first thing. And the first thing we can know from journalism is that it's a passion job. People who do that job are passionate with their job, which means also they are completely overworked. When you do your passion, usually you don't sleep So that's a study, 390 people who were surveyed on the internet. You have 140 journalists in the survey who work only for 40 hours per week. Most of them, okay, they actually work much more. 64 of them work more than 55 hours per week. Basically, you do that 3 weeks and you start to die. So these people are really passionate with their job. The second thing we know about journalists is that 90% of the info they receive is completely boring. And even worse when they are invited to a press conference. So I ask questions for this particular training. I ask questions to journalists. And one thing I got from Simon. So Simon is pretending to receive an email. Hello Simon, looking for a story. We are pleased to announce that we have closed financing for a very complicated project that doesn't sound interesting at all. There will be a press conference tomorrow where we will give the story to all media at once, so nothing exclusive for you. Going there, waiting around, listening to the boring press conference, and then going back home will take you only 3 hours of your time. See you there. Simon is working for the Financial Times. Okay, Financial Times is one of the most efficient media you can get if you want some rebounds in your communication. So if the guy tells you that's 90% of the communication he gets, a lot of people who do not know how to do their job. Another insight, most people think the editors in European stories are gatekeepers. Okay, you have the editor and lots of journalists, and the editor is saying like, no, Europe is crap, we don't want to publish anything about that. That's fake. I actually asked the question to journalists, they told me editors do not limit their actual articles. What limits the article is the thing that starts the whole story. They are invited to things which are not interesting in the first place. You invite your friends at a restaurant. Do you imagine they will tell the story to all their friends after that? They went to a restaurant, you've been there, that's good. No, you don't care. Okay, you've been to the restaurant 20 times. You invite them for an escape room, skydiving, or sailing on the sea, like we will do tomorrow. That's a story, okay? That's what the journalist is going to carry forward. You're going to tell that to all your friends. That's the idea behind organizing a field trip. When we did the Eurobabel series, we got 100 articles. It started with a very limited number of journalists. We invited them on the filming, okay? That's a funny thing to do. 1 hour on the filming, asking the crew how they actually perform and the rest. Very fun thing to do for a journalist. Jurist was telling me on the questionnaire, I have no use for a dry press release when everything is over. Make us part of the project since the beginning. Our role is to co-create. You will not make it alone. People are journalists. It's not like another category in the world. These are people and they want to be involved in all the things we do. So as press officers, as communication officers, as PR specialists, that's the first thing to understand. We are talking to actual people. So how I did it myself, I'm giving you my technique so you can use it directly after that. That's an easy thing. I wrote an email. I wrote an email with actually a personified name. I didn't write Dear Journalist. I'm asking something, well, no need to read the email. You will receive it if you want to use it and copy-paste it. The first thing I asked the organizer of this conference to put me in contact. What resulted 2 answers on 10 people. 2 people contributed to my reflection thanks to the first contact, which was an authority, thanks to the organizers. Then I sent a personalized email, including the name of people, eventually checking their bio to add a small detail. I got 2 answers of the remaining 8 people, so I'm still tracking 6 people. I asked in a follow-up email, that's the second step. You ask for a follow-up, you help the person remember. I got 3 answers more, which means 7 on 10 answered, plus 2 interviews on the spot. I had 9 journalists, over 10, who gave me direct, practical, operational answers for you today. That's quite great. Most of them were speakers in this room in the last 2 days. Very quick about the question you will find. How would you define your media? That was one of the questions I asked. Do you feel communication officers of European founded projects are useful for your work? Useful? And if they, and when they contact you, what has happened, okay? Other questions, if you had one advice to give to communication officers who take contact with you, what would it be? People like to give opinions and advices. So you ask them, they give advices. Among this proposal, what is the most relevant tool for you to learn about the story? So that's the next part of the presentation. If you stay with me, you will learn what is actually operationally useful. And I ran a questionnaire with you to ask you what are your media habits and what are the tools you use. And so basically what I got, if you want to use the same software, by the way, it's called Typeform. First question, are you managing over people? No, the majority of you are not managing over people. That means you actually do the work by yourself. You put your hands into the motor. That's great because that's how we learn faster. How many years have you been working in the field of communication? Average, almost 7 years, with people very experienced, more experienced than me actually. And communication strategy and plan, why communicate Most people do not know why they're communicating. When you work 10 years in a field, that's not normal. But that's difficult. I understand it. That's why I'm training people in strategy of communication. That's a very difficult field. Evaluate ROI and set up KPIs. So that's a question I put to reveal your actual knowledge about the things. I get 2 points on 5. These are 2 words. When you actually work for a while, you understand them. Return on investment. How much money do I spend to get how much attention? KPIs, key performance indicators. How can I plan how much attention I will get? How to anticipate that. If you don't get these words, it means you can still read some books, and that's very good to train. Most often, you are not trained in communication when you start being communication officers in institutions. That's normal, that's a basic, that's, I would say, 95% of my audience. But you can still train. There are plenty of books. Actually, it's a very cool field. Everyone exchanges techniques. Which communication tools do you feel most comfortable with? Website, emailing, Facebook, organizing events, video interviews. That's not fancy tools, but that's tools that work perfectly. We'll see actually how much they work. I asked the same thing to journalists. What are the things you need to be contacted? An invitation to visit the project site during a field trip. That I love. A webinar online of an hour to ask any questions, so I don't have to move. I can just open my computer and that works. An infographic with lots of data and numbers on the project results, especially a timeline to put context. They ask for these sort of things. Some video interviews of users of the project, so I actually can see it's real. They don't ask all the things at the same time. But these are tools they really like. But the one tool they prefer, every journalist, it's going to be amazingly high-tech, a personalized email. That's it. Nothing more. First, know what I usually write about before offering me a generic story that you are offering to dozens of other journalists. Then write me an email, and we will call each other. You have a guy working, he's moving 800,000 people when he's writing an article, and all of them told the same story. Journalists, they like to be involved as human beings. Crazy. It's not about the tools. The tools are completely neutral. It's how you use them. This picture, you know, this kind of campaign shot on an iPhone, okay, it's not a 6,000 euros camera. It's a shitty phone. Well, it's not shitty, but it's a phone. And you have beautiful pictures. It's how much you do with the actual tool. So an email is already a great tool. I had another question, how to get the media interested in the topics we want to communicate. Well, you are telling me that a road was built. Fine, thanks. That was rock this morning. But if you tell me how the road was built, what were the problems you had? This is a story for me. The person doesn't want to know, hey, I did that, great. I did an escape game without you, that was great. No, that was the escape game. Do you want to come with me the next time? It's going to be super fun. You need to help the person you talk to. That's the main thing in communication. You help people understand what you have in mind. Most of the time it starts with understanding it yourself, but then you help others. And when it doesn't work, well, that's a good illustration. That's a video for minute 30.
There's this door on the 10th floor of the Vox Media office that I hate so much. God damn it. You ever hit this door wrong?
Pretty regularly.
Have you seen people misuse it?
All the time, every day. Constantly. I hate this door.
Me too, Kelsey. But here's the thing. As soon as you start looking for confusing doors, they are everywhere.
It's push.
Why? I feel like Roman Mars would know about this.
This is 99% invisible. And those doors you made are called Norman doors.
What's a Norman door?
Don Norman wrote the essential book about design. He is the Norman of the Norman door.
All right, and where is this guy?
You must go to San Diego.
Okay. Hi, Joe. Hey, I'm Don Norman. Gee, you know, it's hard to describe what I am.
Well, he's been a professor of psychology, professor of cognitive science, professor of computer science, a vice president of advanced technology at Apple. But for our purposes.
I was spending a year in England, and I got so frustrated with my inability to use the light switches and the water taps and the doors even, that I wrote this book.
If I continually get a door wrong, is it my fault?
No. In fact, if you continually get it wrong, it's a good, but if other people continually get it wrong, good sign that it's a really bad door.
A Norman door is one where the design tells you to do the opposite of what you're actually supposed to do.
Okay, I will stop here, but the whole idea is that if most people do not get your message, it's not a problem of people. It's a problem of the message and the design of the message. 95% of the people I actually train, they tell me, first, they don't get it. I'm doing my job, they don't get it. But if no one gets it, it's a Norman door. We have a problem. You can read the book of Don Norman. You can also read these two books about how we think. This one is quite easy to read, Blink. It's maybe a bedtime reading. The other one, you need 2 months, not really easy. That's the latest advance in behavioral psychology. How to communicate with the general public? That was one of the questions I received. I think that's a really big obsession for anyone in communication, right? The general public. What is the general public first? Is that your butcher, the security guy at the hotel, your receptionist, and everyone in the room? Because we are all the general public potentially, 500 million people. That doesn't work. So you need to target first. And even with targeting, that's a very practical breakdown of how much it costs to reach the general public. Okay? So let's say you're very good. 0.5 euros to reach one person. You're really good already. It's more in the 2 euros in general. The production of all the things, the time you spend, and actually reaching people. So I want to reach 10,000 people, that's about 5,000 euros. That's very cheap. You have to have good guys with you, but that will be more or less what it costs. A journalist, what happens if you spend 5,000 euros of your time, mostly, organizing a field trip, inviting the journalist, sending emails, talking to him? Possibly, we had this morning Rock, 50,000 visitors a day on his website. You get maybe 20% of them over 2 or 3 days if the article stays on the page. Which one is more cost efficient for you? That's you to decide, but that's the whole idea. You don't talk to the general public directly because it would be extremely painful to do it. You try to find the best vehicle to that. And in this case, you have to choose what is the most cost efficient objective for you. I can't choose. Sometimes we are talking to lots of individuals via platforms like Facebook, like the rest, mostly via advertising, but that works in the same way. Another question I got is, if you mention the word strategy, the audience loses interest right away. But then again, if you do not mention the strategy at all, what do we have in the first place, right? Okay, who didn't see this series? Okay, 2, 3, oh no, my God, you're really a strange audience. Well, you heard about it, Game of Thrones. If you're a fan of Game of Thrones or you look at Game of Thrones sometimes, it doesn't mean that you want to know every little faction of Game of Thrones and the strategy beyond what they do, why they move, how they conquer the territory. Strategy is for people who really have an interest in strategy first. You don't talk about the strategy of everything. Napoleon didn't talk about the strategy to all his soldiers. He was talking to his generals. He wasn't very good in strategy, but anyway, he didn't talk about it. This is your internal mechanic. Different audience have different needs, and sometimes a journalist will be interested in a strategy. Then you have everything already prepared. That's great. Another question, use of language. We use too many acronyms used by people in RMRS world, and it's not attractive and interesting for others. So should we use them or not, the acronyms? Well, same thing, the audience. If your audience understands the acronyms, use them. It's faster. If they don't use them. How do you know? You ask first. You ask. That's it. Another question, journalists don't have enough knowledge and authorities don't give them valuable information. I just showed a video, that's my answer. That's a Norman door. People don't get it, that's a Norman door. You need to rethink your strategy, you need to rethink your communication, you need insights, you need to understand who you're talking to. That's as easy as it is. How to make EU information interesting for an audience? Well, that's exactly what I said when I say insight. For any advertising professional, insight is like the cornerstone of everything we do. I can formulate it differently, the power of knowing someone. When you talk to your mom, to your friends, to your uncle, you know how to talk to that person because you know the person. When you send a message and the person only has 10 seconds to see it on a Facebook feed or read the title of a press release, you really need to know him well to understand how it's going to motivate him to do the rest. And you have 10 seconds, not more. Antonio, super interesting. I'm a radio host for the Italian-speaking community in Slovenia. If I can have someone speaking Italian over the phone, even a poor Italian, that's enough for me to consider a story. How did I know that? I asked him. What's your job? What can be helpful for you? I just look for people who talk Italian. Wow, there are plenty all around, okay? And you get all these audience for that. I ask the question. Mirella, be natural, don't try to sell me something. You try to sell a something Blom to Mirella, she doesn't want to take it. She wants to co-create with you. She wants to be there with you, building a story. That's not completely individual. Huh? That's very universal for most of the things we read. How to make a big effect with a small budget? That's a question every client have, obviously. Huh? I'm a working professional, so all my clients come, I don't have money. That's great. You actually come to the right door because we are using one thing, which is called creativity. That's the next step. That's after you ask the question, you understand something, you get an insight, then you can think how to trigger more attention with creativity. Creativity is earning media attention. There was a campaign for newspapers. The newspapers have a problem, in this case in Belgium. They don't sell enough advertising space. So they need to convince advertisers to spend money on newspapers. To convince them, they need to show that newspapers are actually capturing the attention of people, right? So they made a campaign for free people. Free, the target audience. I didn't do the campaign. It's Duval Guillaume, one of the most creative agencies 10 years ago in Belgium. They won every creative awards for a decade, and they are very good. So they build a campaign for free persons. Obviously, that's the idea of convincing more advertisers to spend money. The whole thing, they knew the advertisers would read your newspaper. That's a stupid insight, but that was working for them. Communication is a profession in an industry that is far larger than you think, okay? I usually comment a little bit more on that, but I don't have much time. We are talking about $500 billion industry. It's larger than the three most important entertainment industry in the world, which are film, music, and video games. It's larger than that. There are plenty of professionals, and we are actually competing against these people. The great thing, if you need to learn about it, it's absolutely not new. This is an image in Pompeii, 1st century, that says basically if you buy 2 hours of wine, you get 1 free. It's happy hour 2,000 years ago. Huh?
It's not really happy.
Yeah, you have to leave the bar quickly after that. There are plenty of books, of techniques, of lectures online to understand everything about the tools, the tactics you can use, but the whole thing is you're talking to people. So how much do I know about people? So basically, to sum up, start with what you know. Don't get crazy with what you don't know. Start with what you still can't explain well. If you can't explain well, it's basically because you don't understand it well. So if you can work on that, everything becomes clearer. And the last thing, start with the questions. We all assume we understand people. We never understand people. I don't understand you. You don't understand me. But if I ask questions, at least I understand a little bit better. And that's what we are doing with this sort of conferences, because someone had a great idea of mixing journalists and people communicating in the same room for 3 days. So that's the moment to help us, each other. We have to be helpful for each other, because that's not a journalist. That's a stereotype of a journalist, that's a stock image from Shutterstock. The actual journalists are in the room. The ones who are passionate about the project, European project, want to hear about macro regions. That's not an easy topic, and you need to be very passionate. What I give you, a questionnaire in Word format, all the questions I've used. I also give you this excellent article, How to Write an Effective Press Release, by the guy who actually received them. That's quite useful. I had a last question, and this is the last thing I can help you with. There is a lack of content to communicate about macro-region strategies. There's never a lack of content. There's a little bit of lack of imagination and techniques to generate ideas. I'm going to show you a campaign where they had nothing to say. And you will see that it's quite well done to attract attention. But what I will ask you, or propose you mostly, is that I'm very good at organizing brainstorming sessions and passing a very, very efficient technique of brainstorming. Like efficient, I'm talking about in 10 minutes, you generate a minimum of 20 ideas. So if people struggle with their actual project, I think it's tonight the deadline, I will be there, okay? I teach you the actual brainstorming technique. In 15 minutes, 20 minutes, you can radically change the way you think. I'm not kidding. So, about this hotel that says nothing about everything.
Welcome to the Hans Brinker Budget Hotel, Amsterdam. A hotel whose lack of services and features makes it the most accidentally eco-friendly hotel on the planet. This eco-commitment begins in the lobby. To lessen our impact on the environment, staff do as little as possible for guests. An eco-elevator ensures that the only energy spent going to the room is your own. Take a look around the Hans Brinker Eco Suite. To conserve space and energy, up to 7 guests can sleep in a single room. Telephone and 24-hour room service, minibar, satellite TV, just a few expenses our hotel is prepared to avoid to save our planet. Eco-lighting, yet another feature. Every suite comes with a carbon-neutral eco-climate control system. It's also easy to use. Guest bathrooms are a celebration of cleanliness and eco-friendliness. Refresh yourself with our range of eco-toiletries and the eco-shower. We also ask you, the guest, to help honor our eco-commitment. Leave the towel on the rack. We won't wash it. Throw the towel on the floor. We still won't wash it. The Hans Brinker Budget Hotel is committed to doing as little as possible to accidentally help our planet as much as possible. Welcome to the Hans Brinker Budget Hotel, Amsterdam. Accidentally eco-friendly.
That's one of the most successful hotels in Amsterdam. Thank you very much. Do not hesitate to take my email address, because I always answer emails. You have a question, I always answer questions, even 4 years later. Huh? No, really. Oh, yeah, I changed. It's talking about great things that make me younger. And if someone wants to benefit of the brainstorming session, I will be there after the end of our day. And we take half an hour. You will see it's very changing, life-changing, I would say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Charlie, for this, I don't know what to say, quick guide, cooking material, putting us to the belief that we could do that, only if we ask questions. So, I hope I did learn something from you, so I would like now to ask 2 guys to help us with the conclusions. So, I would like to invite Mr. Jean-Pierre Halkin, the head of the Macro-Regional Strategies Center of a competence center, DG Radio, to help me conclude together with, it was supposed to be Marko Milosavljevic, the keynote speaker from yesterday, but he has delegated the system to Mr. Mitja Merschol, who will be our guest tomorrow, so if you join us here too. So it will be my question now to Jean-Pierre. What have you learned in these 2 days? What is what you think you could use in our future common work? And what would you like to tell the survivors at the end? Please.
Thank you very much, Andrea. First of all, I would like to say that I really have learned a lot, a tremendous lot, and I even feel more intelligent. Because if I am at the head of a competence center, it does not mean that I'm competent myself, but today and yesterday's presentation made were really, really useful. And the second thing I have learned also is about how much work is already done on communication for macro-regional strategy. And this is something which is very encouraging, and I would like really to applaud, to congratulate all the persons who are already working on communication. We also learned about tips and things we need to pay attention to whenever we are speaking about communication. And the summary presented by Stoyan was also extremely useful for someone like me to have a global view, the global picture we need. And this is really helping me also to see what we can do further in the future. Certainly there is more work to be done, and if we were not all convinced that there was not more work to be done, we would not be here. Someone used the word low-hanging fruit, and I believe it was Stoyan who used it, and indeed there are some low-hanging fruit that we must eat immediately. And I will just use one, which is to work together, all the strategies and the Commission, on some concept definition. Today, in my daily work, where we prepare loads of briefings, which are never landing or having the right impact maybe to the press, we are still struggling to define what a macro-regional strategy is. And there, as it was said, we need to have a message which is sharp, simple, and a single message that we repeat again and again on what a macro-regional strategy is. And agreeing on that would be tremendously useful. What is the process also to set it up? We heard that the process to define a strategy has its own use, its own benefit, but if we would define it better, it would be extremely useful for our own communication. Then certainly we know, and I will come to the two last points on communication, which are dedicated to the audience. We heard that strategies are bottom-up process. And indeed, this is for me one of the most valuable aspects of the strategies. We have not decided in Brussels of what the regions which are surrounding the Baltic Sea, which are on the river basin of the Danube, which are in the Alps, which are around the Adriatic and Ionian Sea, what they need. It was decided and designed by the regions themselves. That's really, really an asset. And so it's very important by accountability that we are able to communicate to all the stakeholders who are involved into that, certainly politicians, decision makers, and we have some in the room, but also civil society, citizens, young people, about what we do. And we've been discussing about that, and this is something which is extremely important, and I see that you have many ideas on that. Where I believe from my past experience I can provide you also more guidance, it is on a topic that was a bit less discussed. It is the Brussels bubble. If we are here today, it's because the person working on the macro-regional strategies decided that there was the need to have more communication. And I really would like to thank Andrea also for organizing this with her team. But we would not be here should the EU would not have been supporting financially and politically the emergence of the strategies. And this is not at all a bottom-up process. This is a totally top-down process. So speaking to the Brussels bubble is very important, because if we don't have any more EU support to the strategies, there will be no strategies. And we were invited, whenever speaking to an audience or a constituency, also to look at future debates. And in Brussels today, the future debate is called post-2020. And I believe we need to take that into account. It was already raised by Dana, notably. What do we have on the radar screen for post-2020? We have many things which are changing. First, the Brexit is there with a net contributor leaving. And then we have new priorities arriving. Security, migration, defense, the need to have a fund to protect the European currency against some risk. We don't want to have to rely anymore on the bailout provided by IMF. We don't want to have to go and ask the Chinese to give us a loan. We would like to be self-sufficient. Those are top priorities, and we can be sure that they will make it up to the budget. Just as a point of comparison, do you know that you are working for a policy which has been a killer? We like to see social cohesion as the policy of the fringe, the nice policy. But in 2006, when the budget was discussed, there was a strong consensus that with the new member states arriving, we needed to boost, in particular, the cohesion policy. In order to do that, without increasing drastically the EU budget, we had to make cuts. And I was in a policy where cuts were made. And guess what? What did we sacrifice? And you may think that people there were believing it will never happen to me. We were discussing about uprooted people who had a special program to address the issues of migrants. This went overboard. We had a special program which we are very ambitious to protect forests and also improve or increase our resilience to climate change. It went overboard. We had a program to prevent weapons trafficking from and to Europe. Overboard also, because when we need to enter new policies, then we need to cut branches. We need to see that we are exposed to risk. So we really need to communicate in Brussels in a very affirmative way. And I can tell you that in 2006, the people working on forest, weapons, migrant, were believing, Jean-Pierre, the problem is so big, I was really quite, let's say, involved in the process, that we will still be there forever. No one is there forever. But we need to communicate on what we do. We have a very solid product. And certainly, if we speak about the way to communicate, something very important was brought. You don't speak in Brussels by coming yourself to speak to the Council or to the Parliament. We need to use the messengers. What was the third parties mentioned? By Dana mentioned the third party who can be used. We have think tanks, we have some MEPs who are particularly active, who are working in areas which are so important, like water, for instance. Water is very important. Civil society pays a lot of attention. So we need to find all the channels to convey messages to Brussels. But we need to convey a very strong and unique message about the strategies, that they are working, delivering, but it is like growing a tree. I mean, you need to wait some time for the tree to be grown up. So we need also to fine-tune the message to Brussels, who are there to do that. And this is also something extremely important to us. So for me, one of the messages we need to work very hard is how can we work for the specific needs of the Brussels bubble. That's something very important. You were speaking about doing the right things, and here also doing the things right is very important. Something we cannot afford is fragmentation in the message. And for that, we also need to listen to what is being discussed in Brussels. Who has listened to the speech of President Juncker? Good. You are 3, I see. 4. Now, it's very important to listen to the speech of President Juncker, but also read Council conclusion on social cohesion, on macro-regional strategies, to see where the budget authority wants to go. Because if we say that we have heard them and we are partially answering their expectation, it's already a good start to engage. They are very important and they feel very important. I am looking at our expert in communication, but it's also recognizing the role of the person is very important. So this is something where I encourage you to, all of us, to be more active. I would not want to close my intervention by sounding too pessimistic. My feeling is that we have an exceptional product. Inviting citizens or allowing citizens of different regions, of different countries, within the European Union, outside of the European Union, to work together to address a challenge collectively is certainly one of the highest added European value we can think about. And I'm convinced that if macro-regional strategies would not exist today, and we had to create a new policy to support, for instance, the management of the water of the Danube River basin, we would have to recreate something which would be very much looking like the strategies, except that we would be 10 years behind. So we have really an exceptional product, but we need to make all efforts we can to valorize it and to sell it into Brussels. That's for me a very big achievement, not at the detriment of selling it to the citizens, to the local politicians, but we need to be sure that whenever someone goes to Brussels, he has a ready-to-use message that he can repeat. Because at the end, I have been quite a long time in Brussels, quite a long time in also financial framework preparation. Having the same message being repeated again and again is working. And some people also are always repeating the last message they are hearing. So if you say it once, it has little chance to be the last one. So we have a good product, we have tremendously committed people, and I must say that coming to DG Regio, it is something which is striking. We have also extremely committed people outside and inside the Commission, and we need to capitalize on that. So that's really my lessons that I learned from those 2 days. And I really would say that the timeliness and the relevance of the topic discussed during those 2 days is exceptional. Thank you.
Thank you. Mitja, you are the synonym of journalism in Slovenia. You were the guy who first approached me 2 years ago and said, look, you deal with the macro-regional strategies, why don't you organize a conference on media? I said, forget it. We are in a presidency of the EUSAIR, we don't have time. Maybe next year. Now we are here. So, what did you learn? What did you find out? How do you feel?
Dear Andrea, thank you so much for these very kind and historic words about my role in this. But let me tell you that when we mentioned, I think the first day of our discussion, when we mentioned the BBC and its radio news in the 30s, which said, there is no news today. But I do have a good news for all of you today, which is that we are going to have a very nice weather tomorrow, and we are going to have a very nice and very, very positive boat trip tomorrow. And we'll discuss on the boat quite a lot of good and positive things. Now, what I learned in these 2-day discussions is that I know a little bit more about strategy, which is nothing without implementation. I learned a lot about implementation because this conference proved to be a good start for implementation of macro-region strategy in communication. And also, I think that communication has proved to be a very useful and positive among us and a good guidance for us for the future, how to do this, how to do networking, socializing with no free lunch, and to go on with our project. I think that we really discovered some things, but we often talked about journalists who are missing, how to attract them, to activate them, to be part of our project and so on. And I've been thinking about journalists when you were talking about social media and you mixed up journalists and all those who are writing in social media and so on. And I said to myself, my goodness, it's like being at school and you mix up pupils and teachers, and teachers are for some time pupils, and pupils are teachers, and teachers are pupils, and so on. So it's like in social media, because they are not all journalists there, but they call them writers, journalists, and so on, which is not correct. Anyway, Marko Milosavljević, my dear friend, Professor Marko Milosavljević, is coming from Ljubljana, but as all professors, he's a little bit late, you know, and he asked me to maybe to say a few words on behalf of his keynote speech that he had yesterday, and that's the answer, about journalists. I think that Marko said that active policy of European Union should answer one single question: how to activate journalists in our macro-regional project. The answer is by financing and enabling employment of journalists in local and national media by special foundation, with which should be put away a gap created in media market nowadays, and education of young and also elder journalists. Thank you so much. See you tomorrow on a boat. And thank you, Andrea, again for organizing this event.
Thank you. Thank you both, gentlemen, but see you first today in the Championship League in the evening, after you have passed the speedlight brainstorming session. So it is my honor to conclude this formal part, which we actually are really approaching. Sorry, I need help. I know that many things has happened. We have asked many questions. We learned a lot of things. I've just learned from Charles-Lee that what we will be asked, and Jean-Pierre was referring for the future, what we'll be asked in the future is actually to do much more with less. And this is not only within the European budget. I mean, it's for everything. And I firmly believe that we could do that, in a sense of the implementation of European policies. How? With the macro-regional strategies. Because by a collaboration, we identify the issues, the topics which are of strategic relevance to the people living in a certain territory, and we are doing this together. We do this in things that have the impact. So we can save a number or a lot of money for not doing non-relevant things. But for a formal conclusion, I need to say that last year during this kind of event, during the stakeholders conference, so we had a number of stakeholders. One of the proposals, we prepared 4 recommendations for the better governance of macro-regional strategies, and one was dealing with the communication. And it said to create a single horizontal pillar for all 4 macro-regional strategies, the media and communication pillar. It's easy to say, it's more difficult to do, so we volunteered in Slovenia, said, okay, we volunteer to put together the first kind of a meeting where we invite all 4 communication responsible people together so that they can meet as they did today. But we would also like to bring the 2 words together, the media and macro-regional, so that we can know each other, ask questions, understand each other, and move forward. But we also asked the professionals, the experts, are we doing the right work? And this is what Stojan was really explaining us today. And all the intention was to increase the visibility of macro-regional strategies. And the experts' proposal is we have to work on 3 levels: on a common content, on a participative process, and innovative tools. And the techniques. Yes. So it was actually this year that we said we need to do 2 things. First, to do the right thing. And there have been a number of things that give us sufficient belief that we are close to defining the right thing. Haven't done that yet, but we are approaching. But once we define the right thing, we also have to do it right. So it's a question for the next year. We have a proposal, but the question is, shall we do it? I cannot say we will do it. It's actually us. Shall we do it? We said it has to be a little bit professionalism in what we're doing. So the question is, who could do it? Do we know? Do we have faith? Shirley said, faith. We need to have personal somebody. And how to organize ourselves. So these are the questions which are left to be answered. So our proposal as a host is actually that we formulate a proposal like last year, share it among the participating countries and regions in all 4 macro-regional strategies and with the European Union institutions, and it is that the macro-regional strategies high-level group, which is the highest political setup responsible for looking and overviewing what is going on in macro-regional strategies, should invite, based on our recommendations, for all 4 macro-regional strategies, the actors responsible for the governance, us, number of them, and communication, to act in line with those recommendations, of course, if they are adopted, to invite the European Commission to further support the improvement of the macro-regional strategy visibility and communication. And, as we said, we would like to meet again, to start the process, participative, that we from time to time meet, discuss, and evaluate whether we are doing the right thing and whether we are still doing the right thing in the right manner. So if you agree with that approach, we will do it, but we will be successful only if you will be sharing and conveying the same message in your individual manner, designed for your individual specific environments that you're dealing with. Thank you. Can I consider the recommendations, at least in this form, accepted? Thank you. And now, the final words. First of all, sincere thanks to the European Commission. Because without the European Commission support, and when saying support, it's tangible support, it's financial support, we would not be able to realize and bring this conference to the truth. I would also like to thank our colleagues from the Government Office for Development and European Cohesion Policy, with their significant efforts and help in organizing and acting also as a facility point of the Adriatic-Ionian strategy, also financially participating in the realization of this conference. I would also like to thank the Alpine Strategy and Action Group number 7. I like it, it's environment, but they do understand the abbreviations, so I can say AGL7. Thank you very much. And also the Alpine Strategy project did collaborate and also did finance a little bit. You see, we are making synergies, it's possible. And in particular, I would like to thank thank our colleagues that were acting as our local provider from the Regional Development Agency of Posauje. With all of you, we were able to bring this conference to through, and the most sincere thanks goes to you. Because without you being here with us on a sunny day, spending your whole 2 days kept in this room, we would never made it. Thank you very much, and see you at the dinner. Sorry, I forgot. Today, no bicycle tour, but we do take care of your health, so there is no bus, you have to walk.